The ship had smelled like vomit and unwashed bodies for 43 days straight. Elena remembered because she'd counted every single one, scratching marks into the wooden post beside her bunk, while other passengers moaned and prayed in a dozen different languages. The crossing from Hamburg had been exactly as miserable as the dockworkers promised. Worse, actually, because nobody mentioned the rats or the way your own sweat could betray you when you ran out of fresh water in the third week. But none of that mattered anymore. That suffering was supposed to be the price of admission to something better, something worth the ocean between her and everything she'd ever known. Standing outside the Red Hollow Land office on a September afternoon so hot the dirt itself seemed to shimmer, Elena smoothed her travel-stained dress for the 100th time and tried to remember how to breathe. Her fingers trembled against the worn fabric. Inside that building, Silas Whitmore was waiting, the man whose letters had been formal but kind, whose photograph showed a stern but respectable face, whose promises of marriage and land ownership had convinced her father to sell their last milk cow to pay for her passage. "You're certain about this?" The voice belonged to Mrs. Halloway, the boarding house keeper who'd given Elena a cot for the past 3 nights in exchange for kitchen work. She was a broad woman with suspicious eyes and flour permanently under her fingernails. "Yes?" Elena's accent thickened the word, turned the S slightly harder than it should be. She heard it herself, that foreignness that no amount of practice seemed to smooth away. "I am certain," Mrs. Halloway sniffed. "Well, he's got money, I'll give him that. Whitmore Ranch is the second largest operation in the territory. You could do worse." "I have done worse," Elena thought, but didn't say. "Much worse. Like watching your mother cough blood into a rag because the landlord wouldn't fix the broken window during winter. Like eating potato skins for a week because that's all that was left. Like knowing your 2 younger brothers would probably never see their 10th birthdays because in your village, poor children simply didn't." She pushed open the door. The land office was bigger than she expected. High ceilings, actual glass in the windows, a floor that didn't creak with rot. 3 men stood near a large desk covered in maps and documents. They turned as one when she entered, and Elena felt their assessment like hands on her skin. "Miss Vargos." The man in the center stepped forward. Silas Whitmore looked older than his photograph, which was typical, but also harder. His suit was expensive, his mustache waxed to perfect points, his eyes cold even as his mouth shaped something that might have been a smile. "You made it. Good." "Yes. Thank you for—" Elena began. "This is Maxwell Crane and Joseph Bridger," Silas interrupted, gesturing to the other men. "Business associates. They're here to witness the arrangements. Make sure everything's legal and proper." The arrangements. That's what he called a marriage proposal that had crossed an ocean. Elena felt something small and cold settle in her stomach, but pushed it aside. This was how Americans did things, she told herself. Practical, businesslike. It didn't mean anything bad. "It's pleasure to meet," she said, then winced internally at the missing article. "It is a pleasure." Maxwell Crane, fat with a gold watch chain, exchanged a look with Joseph Bridger. Neither offered to shake her hand. "So," Silas said, walking a slow circle around her like she was livestock at market. "You're younger than I expected. That's good. Strong enough for work?" "Strong enough." "I am strong, yes. I work hard always." The grammar felt wrong leaving her mouth, but she pushed forward. "In my home, I help my father with horses since I am a small girl. We had breeding stable before the fire." "Fire?" Silas stopped circling. 3 years ago. We lose everything." Elena met his gaze steadily. Shame had its place, but she wouldn't apologize for disasters beyond her control. "Is why I come here. For a new start." "For a new start," Silas corrected absently. He was studying her face now, not kindly. "You're pretty enough, I suppose. That dress is horrible, but we can fix that." Behind him, Joseph Bridger coughed into his fist. It sounded suspiciously like a laugh. "Mr. Whitmore," Elena said carefully, "your letters say you want wife who can work, who understand hard times, who doesn't need fancy things." "I am this person." "I am this person," Maxwell repeated in a mocking accent. "I am this person who doesn't need fancy things." "Jesus Christ, Silas, where'd you find this one? Ellis Island's discount bin?" The room went very quiet. Elena's English wasn't perfect, but it was good enough to catch cruelty. She stood perfectly still, the way rabbits freeze when wolves are near, and waited to see which man Silas Whitmore would choose to be. "Now, Max," Silas said slowly, but he was smiling. Actually, smiling. "Miss Vargos has had a long journey. We should be gracious." Something in Elena relaxed, just slightly. He would defend her. It would be, even if she does sound like she's chewing rocks when she talks. The words hit like a slap. Joseph Bridger burst out laughing. Maxwell wheezed and slapped his knee. And Silas just stood there with that thin smile, watching her face like this was all tremendously entertaining. Elena started, stopped. Her throat had gone tight. "My English is... I practice every day on the ship. I will get better. I promise I will." "Sweetheart," Silas cut her off with a raised hand. "Let me be clear about something. I thought I was getting a wife who'd fit into Red Hollow society, someone I could take to church suppers and county meetings, someone who wouldn't embarrass me in front of business partners." He gestured at her like she was evidence in a trial. "Look at you. You shuffle your feet when you walk. Your grammar is atrocious, and that accent..." He shook his head slowly. "Every time you open your mouth, you announce to everyone within earshot that you're foreign. Do you understand what that means here? People already think I'm too ambitious, too willing to push boundaries. The last thing I need is a wife who makes me look like I'm importing charity cases from the slums of Europe." The coldness in Elena's stomach spread outward, numbing her fingers, her lips, her ability to think of anything to say that would fix this. "Your letters," she managed. "You said you want strong woman. You said background doesn't matter." "I said a lot of things." Silas straightened his cuffs. "But that was before I heard you speak." Maxwell Crane stepped forward, his voice gentler but somehow worse because of it. "Miss Vargos, you have to understand. This is a respectable territory now. We're not some lawless outpost anymore. Standards matter. Reputation matters. A man in Silas's position simply cannot afford to associate with someone so obviously unsuitable." "I can read," Elena said desperately, hating the pleading edge in her voice. "I can write. I know numbers, keeping accounts. I know horses better than most men. You can go back where you came from," Silas interrupted flatly. "That's what you can do." The air went out of the room. "I have no money," Elena whispered. "The ship passage took everything. I cannot..." "Not my problem." Silas was already turning back to his maps, dismissing her. "Mrs. Halloway's boarding house is cheap enough. Do laundry, clean houses, whatever women like you do. Maybe save up enough for a ticket home in a few years." "There is no home. I tell you, the fire told me." "Jesus, even your past tense is wrong." Silas didn't even look up. "We're done here, Miss Vargos. Gentlemen, let's discuss that Henderson property before..." Elena's hand shot out and swept every document off his desk. The papers exploded across the floor in a rustling cascade. Maps rolled themselves into tubes. An inkwell tipped but didn't break, spilling black across polished wood. All three men stared at her. "You," Elena said, and her voice came out different now, harder, sharper, something with teeth. "You are coward." Silas's face went purple. "How dare you? You write letters like brave man. You make promises. You take woman across ocean because you are too... She searched for the word and couldn't find it, so she used her own language. Zababyali, coward. You are afraid what people think, so you hurt someone weaker to feel strong. "Get out," Silas said quietly, and the quiet was worse than shouting. "Get out of my sight before I have you arrested for destruction of property." "Can't arrest someone for knocking over papers," Joseph Bridger said mildly, but he'd stopped laughing. Something in his face had shifted. "Then for trespassing, for disturbing the peace." "I don't care." Silas finally looked at Elena directly, and what she saw in his eyes was worse than anger. It was complete indifference. "You're nothing. You have no money, no connections, no way to force my hand. You're just another desperate foreigner who came here expecting streets paved with gold and found dirt instead. Now get out before I make your situation even worse." Elena stood there for one more moment, memorizing his face. Then she turned and walked out with her spine straight and her head up, even though her whole body was shaking. She made it 3 buildings down before the shaking turned into something worse. The alley behind the general store smelled like rotting vegetables and horse piss, which meant Elena fit right in because she was pretty sure she smelled just as bad after 3 days of panic sweats and the same unwashed dress. She'd wedged herself between two crates and pulled her knees to her chest, trying to make herself small, trying not to think. But thoughts came anyway, marching through her head like soldiers. No money, no husband, no way home, nothing. The afternoon sun beat down on Red Hollow's main street 20 feet away, where normal people did normal things like buy flour and complain about the weather. Elena could hear fragments of conversation, laughter, the jingle of harnesses, life continuing like she didn't exist. Maybe she didn't anymore. That thought sent something hot up her throat. Not tears exactly, but something worse. Something that felt like her insides trying to climb out through her mouth. She pressed her fist against her lips and breathed through her nose until it passed. Crying won't help, she told herself in her own language. Crying is for people who have the luxury of falling apart. But she wasn't crying. She was too angry to cry. The anger was good. It burned away the fear just enough that she could think, could plan. She had maybe 2 more nights at Mrs. Halloway's boarding house before the kitchen work ran out and she'd be on the street. That meant 2 days to find employment. Elena had tried that yesterday. She'd walked into every business on Main Street with her limited English and her foreign accent and her complete lack of references, and every single door had closed in her face. Sorry, not hiring. Can't understand you, sweetheart. Try the laundry, I guess. The laundry wouldn't take her either. The Chinese family who ran it looked at her with something like pity and shook their heads. They had their own problems with Red Hollow's respectable citizens. So here she was, sitting in garbage, trying to figure out how a person survives when an entire town has decided she doesn't deserve to. Hey! Elena jerked her head up. A boy, 12 maybe, skinny, white, stood at the alley entrance staring at her. You that foreign lady who yelled at Mr. Whitmore? Word traveled fast, apparently. Elena wiped her face and tried to look like she wasn't falling apart. What you want? Just asking. Tommy Brass was there. He works at the land office. And he said you called Mr. Whitmore a coward right to his face, in front of Mr. Crane and Mr. Bridger and everybody. The boy's eyes were bright with the kind of excitement that comes from hearing about someone else's disaster. Said you knocked all his papers on the floor. Is that true? Yes, Elena said tiredly. Is true. That's... The boy searched for a word. That's the bravest stupid thing I ever heard. Brave and stupid look same sometimes. Elena pulled herself to her feet, brushing dirt off her dress in a gesture that accomplished exactly nothing. Now go, I'm not entertainment. But the boy didn't move. He was looking at her with a strange expression, something between awe and confusion. You really got no place to go? Why you care? I don't, He shrugged awkwardly. My ma says anyone who stands up to Silas Whitmore can't be all bad, even if you are foreign. Your mother is kind. Elena meant it, even though kindness from strangers felt dangerous right now, like it might crack whatever was holding her together. But I find my own way. Always do. She pushed past him toward the street, not sure where she was going, but knowing she couldn't stay in that alley. Movement was better than stillness. Movement meant you hadn't given up yet. The boy called after her, Prairie's west of town. Sometimes people camp out there when they got nowhere else. Shh, just watch for rattlesnakes. Elena raised a hand in acknowledgement without turning around. West it was then. The prairie opened up like a wound in the earth. That's what Elena thought, standing at Red Hollow's western edge, where the buildings gave way to an emptiness so vast it made her chest hurt. She'd seen fields before. Her village had been surrounded by farmland. But this was different. This went on forever, rolling yellow grass under a sky so big it felt like falling upward. No mountains, no forests, no boundaries. Just space and more space and the constant prairie wind that smelled like dust and something green she couldn't name. Elena adjusted the small bundle of her possessions, basically nothing, and started walking. Her shoes, already worn thin from the ship and the journey west, crunched through dry grass. Grasshoppers exploded away from her steps in little arcs. The sun hammered down on her head. She had no destination. That was fine. Destination implied choice, and she was fresh out of those. What she needed was isolation, somewhere far enough from Red Hollow that she could think without the weight of watching eyes. Somewhere she could figure out her next move, assuming there was a next move. The boy had mentioned camping, and Elena had spent enough nights in her family's barn that sleeping rough didn't frighten her. The town shrank behind her until it was just a smudge of darker brown against all that yellow. Elena had been walking for maybe 30 minutes when she heard it. Thunder. She looked up reflexively, but the sky was painfully clear. No clouds, no storm, just that endless blue. Yet the sound was definitely there, a low rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself, getting louder. Then she saw them. Horses. A whole team of them, maybe 6 or 8, pulling a large freight wagon across the prairie at a dead run. They were coming from the south, angling vaguely toward the road that led to Red Hollow. But something was wrong. Very wrong. The wagon was swaying wildly. The driver, she could barely make him out, was pulling on the reins, but the horses weren't responding. They were running blind, necks stretched, ears flat, driven by something beyond reason. Panic. They were panicking. Elena knew that particular kind of running. Had seen it once when a grass fire swept through her village and their horses tried to kick through their stall doors. Animals didn't think when terror took over. They just ran until they couldn't anymore, or until something stopped them, and that wagon was going to flip. She could see it happening in slow motion, the angle too steep, the wheels hitting rough ground, the whole thing about to tear itself apart. The driver wasn't going to make it. Elena didn't think. Thinking was what careful people did, and careful people didn't end up in alleys behind general stores with no money and no options. She ran. Not toward town, toward the horses. Her father used to say she was crazy around panicked animals. You should be afraid, he'd tell her. Fear is what keeps you from getting kicked in the head. But Elena had never been able to watch an animal suffer without trying to help, even when helping was stupid. Especially when helping was stupid. She angled her run to intercept the team, her breath already coming hard, her worn shoes slipping on the grass. The horses were massive up close, draft animals, probably Percherons or Clydesdales bred for power, 1,000 pounds each of pure muscle and terror. "Hey!" Elena screamed, waving her arms. "Hey! Ho!" The lead horses veered slightly but kept running. Of course they did. A small foreign woman shouting at them meant nothing compared to whatever had spooked them. So Elena did what her father taught her when words didn't work. She sang. Not loudly, that would just add to the chaos, but clear and steady, the old song her mother used to hum in the stables. A melody that had no words but somehow sounded like safety, like everything was fine, like there was no reason to be afraid. Ah! Her legs were burning. The horses were so close now she could see the foam on their mouths, the whites of their eyes. 20 yards, 15. Elena planted her feet and stood directly in their path, still singing. "What the hell are you doing?" The driver's voice cracked with terror. "Get out of the way!" But Elena didn't move. She spread her arms wide and kept singing that wordless melody, putting everything she had into it, all the calm she didn't actually feel, all the steadiness she was faking, all the quiet certainty that everything would be fine even though it absolutely wouldn't be. 10 yards, 5. The lead horses should have run her down, should have trampled her into the prairie dirt without slowing. They didn't. The big bay on the left, the leader, she could tell by how the others keyed off him, suddenly threw his head up and planted his hooves, skidding through grass. The others crashed into his decision, stumbling, breaking their unified panic. And then, impossibly, they stopped. All of them, heaving and trembling and still primed to bolt, but stopped. The wagon tilted dangerously, held for a moment, then settled back with a groan of wood and metal. Elena stood there with her arms still spread, barely breathing, while 8 massive horses stared at her like she was the strangest thing they'd ever seen. Then she started talking, not in English, in the language of her childhood, the words her father had used to gentle their most difficult horses. Soft sounds that weren't really words at all, just tones and rhythms that meant you're safe, you're fine, everything's okay now. She approached the lead bay slowly, still humming under her breath. His ears swiveled toward her, forward, back, forward again. Confused. The panic was draining out of him, replaced by uncertainty. Elena reached up and touched his sweating neck. "Shh," she breathed. "Shh, muy mili. You are good boy, such good boy. Nothing hurt you now. Behind her, someone dropped to the ground from the wagon. Boots hit dirt. She heard ragged breathing. What in the goddamn hell did you just do? Elena glanced over her shoulder. The man was tall, maybe 40, with brown hair going gray at the temples and a face that looked like it had been weathered by every season the prairie could throw at it. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his hands shaking as he pulled off his hat. I stop horses, she said simply. You stop? The man let out a laugh that sounded slightly unhinged. Lady, I've been working draft animals for 23 years. Never seen anyone just stand in front of a stampeding team and sing them to a stop. His old technique. Elena turned back to the bay, running her hands down his neck, checking for injuries. From my home, works good with horses who forget they are not wild anymore. Your home. The man was studying her now, really looking. You're that woman, the one from the ship, Elena. Vargos. She didn't know how he knew her name, but Red Hollow was small. Gossip traveled. Yes. Heard about what happened at the land office. He said it matter-of-factly, not cruel, but not particularly sympathetic either. Just stating information. Rough break. Elena's hands stilled on the horse. You think I make mistake? Standing up to him? Mistake? The man considered this. No, Whitmore's an ass. Probably felt good telling him off. Feel good for maybe 3 seconds, then feel like everything is ending. She resumed her inspection of the bay. No obvious injuries, just exhaustion and residual fear. You have water for them? They need drink. In the wagon, but hold on. The man moved closer, careful not to spook the horses. You're the woman, the one he rejected because of your accent. There it was. The thing everyone in Red Hollow apparently knew, the story that defined her now. Elena kept her eyes on the horses and said nothing. That's the dumbest damn reason I ever heard to reject a marriage proposal, the man said. Elena's head snapped up. What? I said it's dumb. He was looking at her like she was missing something obvious. Man needs a partner out here, not a decoration. Someone who can work, who understands animals, who doesn't fall apart when things go bad. He gestured at the horses. What you just did, that's worth more than sounding like you're from Boston or Philadelphia or wherever the hell Whitmore thinks proper people come from. Something hot and dangerous was rising in Elena's chest. You make fun of me? No, ma'am. And his face was completely serious. I'm telling you, Silas Whitmore is an idiot who doesn't know value when he sees it. Now come on, help me get these horses watered before they decide to spook again. Elena stared at him for a long moment. Then carefully, she nodded. It took 20 minutes to calm the team fully, get them drinking from the water barrels strapped to the wagon, and check all their legs and hooves for damage. The man, he still hadn't introduced himself, worked alongside her, following her lead without question when she showed him which horse needed gentling first, which one was the follower who'd relax once the others did. They didn't talk much. The work said enough. Finally, with the horses settled and tied off to graze, the man pulled out a canteen and offered it to Elena. Drink? She took it gratefully, the water warm but clean. Thank you. Thank you. That wagon's carrying 3 months of supplies. If it had flipped, he shook his head, would have bankrupted me. Elena handed back the canteen. What make them panic? Rattlesnake, I think. Crossed right in front of us about a mile back. Lead Bay spooked and the rest followed. He took a long drink. I'm Coulter Hayes, by the way. I own Iron Creek Ranch, about 10 miles northwest of town. Elena Vargos. But you know already. Yeah. Coulter Hayes studied her face. What are you doing out here anyway? Town's back that way. I know where town is. Elena looked toward the horizon, anywhere but at him. I need somewhere to think, somewhere away from people who stare. People are assholes, Coulter said bluntly. Present company accepted, I hope. That startled a laugh out of her, short and sharp but real. You are different. Different how? You talk to me like I am person, not mistake. Coulter was quiet for a moment. Then, you looking for work? Elena's heart jumped, but she forced herself to stay calm. What kind? Ranch work. Cooking, cleaning, helping with animals. Basic stuff, but it's honest and I pay fair. Got a bunkhouse for hands, but you'd have separate quarters. Room in the main house if you're worried about propriety. Why? Elena asked suspiciously. You don't know me. I know enough. You've got skill with horses, you don't panic in a crisis, and you're clearly willing to work. Coulter shrugged. That's more than I can say for most of the drifters I hire. Your wife, she's okay with strange woman in house? Something crossed Coulter's face, gone too quick to read. Don't have a wife. Never have. It's just me and 3 ranch hands, and honestly, the place is falling apart because none of us can cook worth a damn, and the housekeeping is non-existent. He paused. Look, you need work. I need help. Seems straightforward. It did seem straightforward, which was exactly why Elena didn't trust it. How I know you are not like Whitmore. How I know you don't use me and throw away. Coulter met her gaze steadily. You don't, not yet. But here's what I can tell you. I've been running Iron Creek for 18 years, ever since my father died and left me with more land than sense. I've hired men of every color and background you can imagine. Chinese, Mexican, black, fresh off the boat Irish like yourself. I am not Irish. Whatever you are. Point is, I don't care where you're from or how you talk. I care if you work hard and don't steal from me. He extended his hand. 1 month trial. You hate it, you leave. I hate it, I pay you for time worked, and we part ways. Deal? Elena looked at his hand. Calloused, scarred, honest work written into every line. She thought about Red Hollow behind her, full of closed doors and mocking voices. She thought about Mrs. Halloway's boarding house, where her welcome had already worn thin. She thought about the alley and the garbage, and the slowly dawning understanding that she might actually starve here in this land of supposed plenty. Then she thought about the way Coulter Hayes had called Silas Whitmore an idiot, the way he'd let her lead with the horses without questioning her, the way he was looking at her now, not like she was desperate or foreign or embarrassing, just like she was a person he was making a business proposition to. Elena took his hand and shook it firmly. Deal. Sotis. Iron Creek Ranch looked like it was held together by stubbornness and spite. That was Elena's first thought when the wagon crested the low rise and the property came into view. The main house was decent, 2 stories, wooden, solid enough, but everything else spoke of slow decay, fences sagging between posts, barn doors that didn't quite hang straight, a chicken coop that seemed to be actively trying to fall over. Told you it needed work, Coulter said, seeing her expression. My father was the organized one. I'm just trying to keep things from completely going to hell. Is not so bad. Elena was lying. It was pretty bad. But she'd seen worse in her village, where some families' entire homes were falling apart. At least here the bones were good. With work, can be fixed. That's what I keep telling myself. Coulter pulled the wagon up to the barn. Tommy, Jake, get out here. 2 men emerged from the barn. The first was young, maybe 20, with red hair and freckles. The second was older, lean and weathered, with skin dark enough that Elena knew immediately he'd have his own stories about Red Hollow's respectable citizens. Both stopped dead when they saw her. Who's that? The younger one, Tommy, apparently, looked confused. This is Elena Vargos. She's our new housekeeper. Coulter jumped down from the wagon. Elena, this is Tommy Ross and Jake Freeman. The third hand, Martin, is out checking the north fence. Housekeeper. Jake Freeman said it slowly, his face careful and neutral. Boss, you sure that's wise? After what happened in town is Silas Whitmore proved he's exactly as shallow as I always suspected, Coulter interrupted. And what happened on the prairie 2 hours ago is Miss Vargo stopped a stampeding team that would have killed me and destroyed 3 months of supplies, so yeah, I'm sure. Tommy Ross's eyes got wide. She stopped the stampede? How? Magic, Elena said dryly. I make spell with my terrible accent and horses listen. There was a beat of silence. Then Jake Freeman snorted, once, like he was trying not to but couldn't help it, and the tension broke. Well, damn, Tommy said, grinning. That's better than anything we can do. Welcome to Iron Creek, I guess? Thank you. Elena climbed down from the wagon carefully. Her legs were shaking with exhaustion, but she wasn't about to show it. Where is kitchen? I make dinner tonight. You don't have to, Coulter started. Is part of job, yes? Cooking? Elena raised an eyebrow. So I cook. Unless you want eat whatever bachelor men think is food. Jake Freeman actually smiled at that. She's got your number, boss. We've been eating beans and burnt meat for 6 months. Fine. Coulter pointed toward the house. Kitchen's through the main door, left side. It's a mess. Ignore the mess. The mess was somehow worse than advertised. Elena stood in the doorway of the kitchen and felt something in her chest tighten. Dirty dishes were stacked, piled, really, beside a wash basin that hadn't been emptied in what looked like days. The stove was crusted with old grease. The floor was tracking dirt from multiple pairs of boots, and there were actual cobwebs in the corners. Jesus Christus, she muttered, then remembered she was supposed to be speaking English. Jesus Christ. Told you it was bad. Coulter had come up behind her. Listen, if it's too much, it's not too much. Elena was already rolling up her sleeves. It's just mess. Mess can be cleaned. She turned to face him. I need 3 things. Soap, clean water, and for you and your men to stay out of kitchen for 2 hours. Done. Coulter looked almost relieved. There's a well pump out back and soap's in that cupboard. Yell if you need anything. He left. Elena stared at the disaster of a kitchen for one more moment, then took a deep breath. Okay, she said to no one. You survive Ocean. You survive Whitmore. You can survive dirty dishes. She got to work. 2 hours later, the kitchen was still a mess, but it was an organized mess. Elena had washed and stacked every dish, scraped the worst of the grease off the stove, swept the floor twice, and cleared enough space to actually cook. Her back ached. Her hands were raw from soap and scrubbing. She'd found a mouse nest in one corner and dealt with it without screaming, which she considered a personal victory. But now there was soup simmering on the stove, basic vegetable with what dried meat she'd found in the pantry, and bread dough rising under a cloth, and the whole house smelled like food instead of bachelor desperation. Elena was just testing the soup's seasoning when she heard boots on the porch. Male voices, talking low. Can't be serious. A foreign woman? After what happened? She stopped a stampeding team, Martin, with her bare hands and some kind of singing. I don't care if she wrestled a bear. Whitmore rejected her. That's going to bring attention we don't need. Elena froze with the spoon halfway to her mouth. Let it bring attention. That was Coulter's voice, flat and hard. I'm not turning away good help because Silas Whitmore's a coward. It's not about being a coward. It's about reputation. You think people are going to want to do business with us if we're harboring the woman he publicly rejected? Then they can take their business elsewhere. There was a long pause. Elena very carefully set down the spoon and waited. Boss, Martin said finally, I'm not trying to be difficult, but you're already struggling to get credit from town merchants. You're behind on 2 loan payments. The last thing you need is more reasons for Red Hollow's money men to shut you out. I know exactly what I need. Coulter's voice was tight with something that might have been anger. I need help keeping this ranch from falling apart. I need someone who knows what they're doing with animals. I need to not eat burned beans every goddamn night. Elena Vargos can provide all of that. And what she sounds like when she talks is absolutely none of my concern. Fine. Martin didn't sound convinced. But don't say I didn't warn you. The front door opened and closed. Footsteps moved deeper into the house. Elena stood in the kitchen, very still, and tried to process what she'd just heard. Coulter Hayes was in debt. Bad debt, apparently. The kind where merchants in town were already reluctant to do business with him. And he just hired her, a woman whose mere presence would make his situation worse, because she could cook and handle horses. That was either incredibly noble or incredibly stupid. Elena wasn't sure which, but she suspected it might be both. When the men gathered for dinner 20 minutes later, she served soup and bread without meeting anyone's eyes. Martin, the third ranch hand, older than the others with gray streaks in his black hair and a watchful face, studied her silently while the others ate. This is really good, Tommy Ross said around a mouthful of bread. Like really, really good. Where'd you learn to cook? From Mother. Elena poured water into cups. And from being hungry enough that bad food still seems good. That got a rough laugh from Jake. Fair point. Miss Vargos. Martin hadn't touched his soup. Can I ask you something? Yes? Elena sat down at the far end of the table, her own bowl in front of her. Why are you here? And don't say work. You could find work in town eventually. Why here, specifically? The whole table went quiet. Coulter's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. Elena met Martin's gaze steadily. You hear conversation on porch, yes? You know I hear too? Martin didn't flinch. Yeah, I figured. Okay, so I tell you truth. Elena broke off a piece of bread, not eating it, just holding it. I am here because your boss offer me honest work when every other person in this town tell me no. I am here because he look at me and see person who can do job, not foreign woman who make him look bad. I am here because I have nowhere else to go and nothing else to try. She paused. And I am here because I am very, very good with horses, and I watch your boss almost die today because his team panic, and I think maybe I can help make sure that doesn't happen again. She stopped them. Coulter said it quietly. Stood right in front of a full stampede and stopped them with some kind of song. I've never seen anything like it. Martin looked between them, his expression unreadable. Then he picked up his spoon and tasted the soup, chewed thoughtfully, swallowed. This is really good, he said finally. And if you can handle horses like the boss says, then I guess we'd be fools to turn you away. He pointed his spoon at her. But understand something, this ranch is barely holding on. We're one bad season away from losing everything. We don't have room for drama or problems. You pull your weight and keep your head down. We'll get along fine. You cause trouble, you're gone. Clear? Very clear. Elena dipped her bread in her soup. I cause no trouble, only work. Good. Martin went back to eating. The tension around the table eased slightly. Tommy started talking about the fence repairs they'd finished that afternoon. Jake mentioned seeing wolf tracks near the north pasture. Coulter asked Elena what supplies she'd need from town for the kitchen. It was normal, almost painfully normal, like she was just another ranch hand, not a scandal waiting to happen. Elena ate her soup and tried not to think about how fragile this all felt, like a single strong wind could blow it apart. Yuck. That night, Elena lay in the small room off the kitchen that Coulter had cleared out for her. It was sparse, a bed, a trunk, one window, but it was clean and private and hers, more than she'd had since boarding the ship in Hamburg. Through the thin walls, she could hear the house settling, footsteps on the floor above, the distant sound of men talking low, making plans for tomorrow's work. Elena stared at the ceiling and thought about the enormous sky she'd seen that afternoon, stretching forever in all directions. No boundaries, no limits, nothing to hold you in place, terrifying and beautiful at the same time, just like everything else in this impossible country. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing tomorrow would bring its own set of problems. But for tonight, at least, she had a roof over her head and food in her stomach and work to do that didn't involve groveling. It was more than she'd had that morning. It was enough. For now. The rooster crowed at 4:30 in the morning, which Elena decided was proof that roosters were agents of chaos sent specifically to torture people who'd barely slept. She dragged herself out of bed anyway, splashed cold water on her face from the basin, and got dressed in the dim pre-dawn light. Her body ached in places she'd forgotten could ache. Yesterday's scrubbing and the tension of nearly being trampled had left her muscles stiff and complaining. But complaining was for people who had choices. Elena had work to do. The kitchen was dark and cold when she entered. She lit the stove, set water to boil, and started pulling ingredients from the pantry. Breakfast for 4 men meant a lot of food, and these weren't delicate city merchants who picked at their plates. Ranch hands burned through calories like firewood. She was elbow-deep in biscuit dough when footsteps creaked overhead. A moment later, Coulter appeared in the doorway, his hair sticking up at odd angles. "You're up early," he said, voice rough with sleep. "Ranch not wait for people who sleep late." Elena punched down the dough with more force than strictly necessary. "Breakfast ready in 20 minutes. "You don't have to," Coulter started, then seemed to remember this exact conversation from yesterday. "Right. You're working. Coffee?" "On stove, help yourself." He poured himself a cup and leaned against the counter, watching her work. Elena tried to ignore him, but it was difficult when someone was staring at you while you shaped biscuits. "What?" she finally asked. "Nothing, just—" Coulter took a sip of coffee. "You actually know what you're doing. It's strange having someone competent in the house. You live alone too long, make you forget what normal looks like." Elena arranged the biscuits in the pan. "Your men, they are good workers?" "Tommy's eager but green. Jake knows his stuff but keeps to himself. Martin's the best hand I've got, but he's also the most stubborn son of a gun you'll ever meet. Coulter refilled his cup. They're good men, though. They'll treat you fair. Fair is all I ask. Elena slid the biscuits into the oven. Martin not like me. Martin doesn't like change, but he'll come around once he sees you're serious about the work. Coulter paused. About what you heard last night, the stuff about money. Is none of my business, Elena interrupted. You hire me to cook and help with ranch, not to worry about your finances. Still, you should know what you're walking into. Iron Creek isn't... He struggled for words. We're not prospering. My father had a gift for managing money. I don't. I'm good with cattle, decent with horses, but the paperwork and the planning and keeping merchants happy, I'm terrible at all of it. Elena cracked eggs into a bowl, whisking them harder than necessary. So you make mistakes. Everyone make mistakes. Is not crime. It is when those mistakes might cost you everything. Coulter stared into his coffee like it held answers. I've got 2 loans coming due in November. If I can't pay them, the bank can take the ranch. All of it. The house, the land, the cattle. Gone. How much you need? $800. Elena's hand stilled mid-whisk. $800. That was more money than most people in her village would see in their entire lives. More than she could earn in years, even if she saved every penny. That is very much money, she said quietly. Yeah, Coulter laughed, but it sounded hollow. So you see why Martin's worried about me hiring someone who'll make the town merchants even less likely to extend credit. Elena poured the eggs into the hot skillet, watching them sizzle and set. In my village, there is saying, when house is burning, you don't worry about what neighbors think of smoke, you put out fire. What's that mean? Means you have bigger problems than what Silas Whitmore think about me working here. She gestured with the spatula. You need $800 by November. Today is September. You have maybe 8 weeks. What is plan? Coulter looked at her for a long moment. I don't have one. That's the problem. Then we make one. Elena started plating food. But first, breakfast. Cannot think on empty stomach. By the time the sun actually rose, all 4 men were seated around the kitchen table eating biscuits and eggs and fried potatoes like they hadn't seen food in weeks. Elena sat in her corner, nursing her own plate, and watched them work through the meal with single-minded focus. Boss, Tommy said around a mouthful of biscuit, these are incredible. Where'd you find her? She found me. Sort of. Coulter glanced at Elena. Or I found her. Still not sure which. Don't care who found who, Jake said. Long as she keeps cooking like this, she can stay forever. Martin said nothing, but Elena noticed he'd cleaned his plate completely. That was approval enough. After breakfast, the men scattered to their various tasks. Coulter headed out to check the cattle in the west pasture. Tommy and Jake went to finish the fence repairs. Martin disappeared toward the barn, moving with the deliberate purpose of someone who had a full day's work mapped out in his head. Elena was left with a kitchen full of dirty dishes and 100 other things that needed doing. She chose the barn. Coulter had said she was hired for cooking and housework, but Elena knew horses better than she knew kitchens, and if this ranch was going to survive, the animals needed to be in top condition. Besides, she wanted to check on yesterday's team, make sure none of them had developed stress injuries from the stampede. The barn was bigger than it looked from outside, with stalls for maybe a dozen horses and a loft full of hay that smelled sweet and dusty. Elena stepped inside and let her eyes adjust to the dimmer light. Can I help you with something? She jumped. Martin had appeared from one of the back stalls, carrying a coil of rope. I want check horses, Elena said. From yesterday. Make sure they are okay. Martin's expression was unreadable. They're fine. I already checked them this morning. Good. I check again anyway. Elena moved toward the stalls where the draft horses were kept. Sometimes injury not show up right away, especially after panic. I've been working with horses for 30 years. I think I know how to spot an injury. Elena stopped and turned to face him. I'm sure you do, but I also know horses. And yesterday those animals almost die because something made them panic, so I check. You can watch if you want, make sure I do it right. For a moment, she thought Martin might actually kick her out. His jaw worked like he was chewing something tough. Then he sighed. Fine, but don't mess with their feed schedule. They're on a specific routine. I don't mess with anything. Only look. Elena approached the first stall where the big bay from yesterday stood munching hay. "Hello, muy Millie, you remember me?" The bay's ears swiveled forward. He took a step toward the stall door, curious. Elena opened the door slowly and stepped inside, keeping her movements calm and predictable. The horse watched her but didn't spook. Good sign. She ran her hands down his neck, his shoulders, his legs, checking for heat, swelling, anything that felt wrong. The bay stood patiently, occasionally turning his head to sniff at her hair. "He likes you," Martin said from the stall door. "Usually won't let anyone but me or the boss touch him without making a fuss. Animals know when you're afraid." "I'm not afraid." Elena crouched to examine the bay's hooves, lifting each one carefully. "I respect them, but not fear." "There's a difference?" "Big difference. Fear make you freeze or run. Respect make you pay attention." She set down the last hoof and straightened. "He is good. No injury, just tired." Martin grunted. "Told you." Elena moved to the next stall, then the next, checking each of the draft horses methodically, talking to them in soft tones, earning their trust. Martin watched the whole time, saying nothing, but she could feel his evaluation like pressure on her back. The last horse, a younger mare, gray with darker dapples, was more skittish. She danced away when Elena entered the stall, snorting nervously. "That one's trouble," Martin said. "Got her 6 months ago from a farm auction. Never fully settled in." Elena stood very still and started humming, the same melody from yesterday, wordless and calming. The mare's ears flicked toward the sound. "Come on, Draha. Nobody hurt you here." Elena held out her hand, palm flat, letting the mare decide whether to approach. It took 3 minutes. Then the mare stretched her neck out, nostrils flaring, and touched Elena's hand with her soft nose. "Well, I'll be damned," Martin muttered. "She won't let anyone near her without halter and lead." "She is scared, not mean. Big difference." Elena stroked the mare's face gently. Something bad happened to her before. Someone hit maybe, or tied too tight. She remember. "Can you fix that?" Elena glanced at Martin. "Maybe. Take time. Need work with her every day. Teach her people can be kind." She paused. "You want me to try?" Martin was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Yeah, we could use another trained horse. If you can gentle her, that'd be useful." It wasn't trust, but it was close enough. Elena spent the next hour working with the gray mare, just standing in her space, humming occasionally, letting the horse get used to her presence without pressure. When she finally left the barn, her back was aching from standing so still, but the mare had let her touch her neck 3 times without pulling away. Progress. The rest of the morning disappeared into laundry. Elena hauled water, scrubbed clothes on a washboard that destroyed her knuckles, and hung everything to dry on lines strung behind the house. The prairie wind whipped at the wet fabric, making the shirts and trousers dance like ghosts. It was mindless work, the kind that let your brain wander while your body went through motions. Elena's brain wandered straight to the money problem. $800 by November. She did the math in her head. 8 weeks? Roughly 60 days. That meant Coulter needed to earn about $13 a day, every day, just to break even. More if he had other expenses. $13 a day from a struggling ranch. It seemed impossible, but Elena had survived impossible things before. The trick was breaking big problems into smaller ones. Don't think about crossing an ocean. Think about surviving 1 more day on the ship. Don't think about learning a whole new language. Think about learning 10 new words. Don't think about $800. Think about what the ranch could sell, what could be improved, what was being wasted. She was still thinking when hoofbeats approached from the south. Elena shaded her eyes and watched a rider crest the rise. Not one of the ranch hands. This person sat their horse differently, looser, like they were out for pleasure rather than work. The rider got closer. Elena's stomach sank. It was a woman. Young, maybe 20, wearing a riding outfit so clean and expensive it practically announced, "I have never done actual work in my life." Her blonde hair was perfectly arranged under a hat that probably cost more than Elena's entire wardrobe. The woman reined up near the house and dismounted with practiced ease. She tied her horse to the porch rail, then turned and saw Elena standing by the laundry lines. Her expression flickered. Surprise, confusion, then something harder. "You must be the foreign girl," she said, Her voice was sweet enough to rot teeth. The one Silas rejected. Elena forced herself to stay calm. I am Elena Vargos. Can I help you? I'm Caroline Whitmore, Silas's sister. The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I heard my brother hired someone new, though I must say I'm surprised Coulter would take on someone with your reputation. I have no reputation. I am here 3 days. Exactly. And in those 3 days, you've already caused quite a stir. Caroline moved closer, her riding boots crunching on the dry grass. People are talking, wondering what Coulter Hayes thinks he's doing, bringing a scandal right into his home. Elena's hands tightened on the wet shirt she was holding. I am not scandal. I am worker. Oh, sweetheart. Caroline's voice dripped false sympathy. You really don't understand how things work here, do you? Reputation is everything in Red Hollow. And right now, you're the woman who wasn't good enough for the Whitmore family. That stain doesn't wash out. Then, is good thing I am not trying to join your family. Elena hung the shirt with more force than necessary. I am trying to work. Now, if you excuse me, I'm here to see Coulter, actually. Is he around? Elena pointed toward the west pasture. He is checking cattle. Might be gone hours. That's fine. I'll wait. Caroline settled herself on the porch steps like she owned them. We have business to discuss anyway. My family's been thinking about investing in some of his land. Something cold slid down Elena's spine. Investing? Well, buying, really. Coulter's in debt. Everyone knows that. My father's willing to take some of his property off his hands. Help him clear those loans before the bank gets involved. Caroline examined her fingernails. It's the charitable thing to do. Charitable? Elena tasted the word like poison. You mean you want to take his land while he is desperate? Caroline's sweet expression finally cracked, showing something sharper underneath. I mean, we're offering a solution to his problem. If he's smart, he'll take it. If he's not, she shrugged. Well, the bank will take everything anyway. At least this way he'd walk away with something. Elena wanted to throw the wet laundry at this woman's perfect face. Wanted to tell her exactly what she thought of people who circled struggling ranchers like vultures looking for carrion. But causing a scene would only make things worse for Coulter, so instead she said very calmly, I tell him you are here when he comes back. You do that. Caroline stood and brushed off her skirt. And sweetie, a word of advice. If you're planning to stay in this territory, you might want to work on that accent. People don't trust what they can't understand. She swept back to her horse and rode off, leaving Elena standing there with her fists clenched and her heart pounding with rage. When Coulter returned an hour later, dusty and tired, Elena met him at the barn. Caroline Whitmore was here, she said without preamble. Coulter's face went carefully blank. What did she want? She say her family want buy your land, help you with debt. Of course they do. Coulter started unsaddling his horse with jerky, angry movements. The Whitmores have been trying to get their hands on Iron Creek for years. My father refused to sell, and so will I. Even if you lose everything? Especially then. He yanked the saddle off and nearly dropped it. I'd rather the bank take it than give Silas Whitmore the satisfaction. Elena caught the saddle before it hit the ground. That is pride talking. Damn right it is. Coulter grabbed a brush and started working on his horse with more force than necessary. You don't know the Whitmores like I do. They don't help people. They consume them. They'd buy my land, work it into their operation, and erase every trace that Iron Creek ever existed as its own ranch. Better than losing everything. Is it? Coulter stopped brushing and looked at her directly. My father built this place from nothing. Worked himself into an early grave doing it. This land, it's all I have left of him. I'm not handing it over to people who'd turn it into just another piece of Whitmore property. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to point out that dead fathers didn't care about land, and living sons needed to be practical. But she understood stubbornness, had plenty of it herself. Okay, she said finally. So we find another way. We? Coulter raised an eyebrow. You hire me. That mean your problems are a little bit my problems too. Elena started hanging up the tack properly. Besides, if ranch fail, I am out of job. Is selfish reason. That got a rough laugh out of him. Fair enough. They worked in silence for a few minutes, settling the horse, organizing equipment. Then Coulter said quietly, Thank you for telling me about Caroline and for everything else. Is my job? No, your job is cooking and housekeeping. Taking my side against the Whitmores and helping me figure out how to save this place, that's something different. Elena didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, just kept working the way she always did when words failed her. That evening, after dinner, Elena was scrubbing the last pot when Martin appeared in the kitchen doorway. Need to talk to you, he said. Elena's stomach tightened. This was it. He'd convinced Coulter to fire her. Too much trouble, too much risk. She dried her hands slowly, buying time. Okay. Martin stepped fully into the kitchen and closed the door behind him. That thing you did with the gray mare today? That was good work. Elena blinked. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I'm about to ask you to take on more. Martin pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. We've got 18 cattle coming into breeding season. 3 of them are first-time mothers. They're going to need watching. I don't know much about cattle, Elena admitted. Horses? Yes. Cattle? Not so much. That's fine. I can teach you the cattle part. But here's the thing. Ranch work means long days. Means being out in the pastures from dawn until late. Means getting dirty and exhausted and dealing with animals that don't care if you're tired. Martin fixed her with a hard stare. Are you actually up for that? Or are you just here because you had nowhere else to go? It was a fair question, a harsh one, but fair. Elena sat down across from him. In my village, I wake up at 4 every morning. I carry water from well because we have no pump. I work in stable until dark, then help mother with cooking and cleaning. When father died from pneumonia, I take over all of his work. I do this for 3 years. She met his gaze steadily. I am here because I have nowhere else. This is true. But I am also here because I am very, very good at working hard. So yes, I am up for long days and dirt and animals who don't care if I'm tired, is what I know how to do. Martin studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded once, sharp. Okay then, tomorrow you start learning cattle work. Be ready at dawn. He stood and headed for the door, then paused. And Elena, that thing you said earlier about the house burning, that was smart. Boss needs people around him who think like that. Then he was gone, leaving Elena sitting alone in the kitchen with her heart beating just a little bit faster. Maybe she could do this after all. The next 3 weeks blurred together into a routine so exhausting that Elena sometimes fell into bed without even taking off her boots. Dawn, kitchen work, breakfast for 4 hungry men. Morning, cattle work with Martin, learning to spot illness, checking pregnant cows, fixing fences. Afternoon, horse training with the gray mare, who was slowly, painfully learning to trust again. Evening, cooking dinner, cleaning up, falling into bed like a stone. Then doing it all again the next day. Her hands developed calluses on top of calluses. Her back stopped complaining about the work and just accepted it as the new normal. Her English improved through sheer necessity. When a cow is trying to break through a fence, you don't have time to search for vocabulary. The men stopped treating her like a guest or an intruder. She just became part of the ranch's rhythm, another worker doing what needed doing. But Red Hollow hadn't forgotten about her. Every trip into town, and there had to be trips for supplies the ranch couldn't produce itself, brought reminders that she was still the foreign woman who'd been rejected. The merchants who would serve her did so with tight expressions. The ones who wouldn't just turned away. Women whispered when she passed. Men stared. The worst was the general store. Elena needed flour, sugar, and salt. Simple enough. She walked in with her short list and her carefully saved coins, and the man behind the counter, Mr. Patterson, according to the sign, looked at her like she was something unpleasant he'd found on his shoe. "Help you?" he said, not moving from his position by the register. "I need flour, 20 pounds, also sugar and salt." Elena put her list on the counter. Patterson glanced at it. "You working for Hayes?" "Yes." "He send you to buy on credit?" "No, I pay cash." Elena showed him the coins Coulter had given her. Patterson's expression shifted slightly, but not in a good way. "Cash, huh? Where'd a woman like you get cash?" "From working. I am paid for my work." "Paid pretty well, looks like." Patterson's tone suggested something ugly. "Must be real good at whatever Hayes is paying you for." It took Elena a moment to understand the implication. When she did, heat flooded her face. I cook and work with animals, she said, keeping her voice level through sheer force of will. That is all. Sure it is, sweetheart. Sure it is. Patterson finally moved, gathering the supplies with exaggerated slowness. You know what people are saying, don't you? About Hayes taking in Whitmore's rejected bride? About what you must be doing to earn your keep? Elena's hands tightened on the counter edge. People can say what they want. Does not make it true. Maybe not, but perception is reality in a small town. Patterson dumped the supplies on the counter. $2 even. It was at least 50 cents more than it should be. Elena knew it. Patterson knew she knew it. But arguing would only make things worse. She paid, took her supplies, and walked out with her spine straight and her eyes burning. She made it halfway back to where she'd tied the wagon before the tears came. Not sad tears, angry ones, hot and bitter, the kind that made her want to scream or hit something or burn the whole goddamn town down. Instead, she wiped her face roughly, loaded the supplies, and drove back to Iron Creek. Coulter was in the barn when she arrived. He took one look at her face and his expression darkened. What happened? Nothing. Elena started unloading. Store trip is fine. Elena, what happened? She told him. Not the ugly implication, she couldn't make herself say that out loud, but the overcharging, the suspicious questions, the way Patterson had looked at her. When she finished, Coulter was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, very calmly, I'm going into town. No, Elena grabbed his arm. Will only make worse. He can't treat you like that. He can. He did. And if you go make scene, then everyone in Red Hollow know you defend me, and then they make more gossip about what I am doing here. Elena forced herself to meet his eyes. I survived people being mean before. I survived this too. But I cannot survive if you lose your ranch trying to defend my honor. It's not about honor. It's about basic human decency. Then Red Hollow is short on both. Elena let go of his arm. Please, let it go. Fighting with Patterson does nothing except give people more to talk about. Coulter looked like he wanted to argue, but finally he nodded, frustrated and angry, but accepting. Fine, but I'm not buying from Patterson anymore. We'll take our business to the store in Blackwood. It's farther, but they're not jackasses. It was a small victory, but Elena would take it. That night, unable to sleep, she slipped out to the barn. The gray mare was still awake, moving restlessly in her stall. Elena let herself in and started humming that wordless song, the one that seemed to calm even the most frightened animals. The mare settled within minutes, coming to stand beside Elena in the dark. You and me, Elena whispered, stroking the mare's neck. We are same. Come to new place. Everyone think we are trouble, but we just want to be safe, yes? Just want someone to be kind. The mare's breath was warm against her shoulder. Elena stayed there until her own breathing matched the horse's, slow, steady, calm. Then she went back inside and actually managed to sleep. The next morning brought disaster. Martin found her at the kitchen before breakfast, his face grim. We've got a problem. What kind of problem? The kind where 6 of our cattle broke through the north fence during the night and wandered onto Whitmore property. Silas is holding them until Coulter pays a recovery fee. Elena's stomach dropped. How much? $50. 50. She couldn't even finish. $50 for 6 cows that had accidentally wandered through a broken fence. It was extortion. Gets worse, Martin continued. Coulter doesn't have $50 right now. Not liquid. Everything's tied up in supplies and the next loan payment. So what we do? I don't know. But the boss is already riding out there to deal with it, and I got a bad feeling about how that conversation's going to go. Elena didn't think. She just moved, running for the barn, saddling the gentlest horse they had, the one she'd been riding for supply runs. Where are you going? Martin called after her. To help! Elena swung into the saddle. Which direction? Elena, this isn't... Which direction? Martin pointed northeast. Follow the fence line. You'll see the Whitmore property marker, but this is a bad idea. Elena was already riding. She found Coulter 20 minutes later sitting on his horse at the edge of Whitmore property. Silas was there too, along with 2 ranch hands and 6 very confused-looking cattle. Don't care about your cash flow problems, Silas was saying as Elena approached. Your animals, your responsibility, $50, or they stay here until you do have the money. They broke through a fence you know needs repair, Coulter shot back. This is an accident, not theft. Funny how your accidents keep ending up on my land. Silas smiled coldly. Makes a person wonder if you're having trouble managing your operation, Hayes. Silas! Elena's voice cut through before she could stop herself. Both men turned to stare at her. Coulter's expression was somewhere between shocked and horrified. Silas's was pure contempt. Well, Silas said slowly, if it isn't my former betrothed, come to save your employer, sweetheart. Elena forced herself to dismount calmly, to walk forward with her head up. Everything in her wanted to run, but running was for people who had options. I come to make deal, she said. Elena, no. Coulter started. She ignored him. You want $50. Fine. I work it off. Silas laughed. You? Work off $50? Doing what, exactly? Whatever needs doing. Cooking, cleaning, animal work. Elena kept her voice steady. I work for you 1 week. You let the cattle go. Everyone happy. No one is happy with that arrangement, Coulter said flatly. Elena, get back on your horse. But Silas was studying her with new interest. 1 week of work for $50. That's generous of you. His smile turned sharp. Though I wonder what Coulter Hayes will do without his live-in help for a week. Must be hard running a ranch when your housekeeper suddenly disappears. The implication was clear. Accept this deal and let everyone in Red Hollow think the worst. Elena felt the trap closing but couldn't see another way out. $50 might as well be $500 to Coulter right now, and 6 cattle could die if they were kept penned up out of spite. I don't care what people think, she said. Cattle need to go home. This is way to make that happen. Elena, Coulter's voice was low and urgent. We'll find another way. Don't do this. There is no other way. She looked at Silas. 1 week, starting tomorrow. You let cattle go now. Silas pretended to consider. Tell you what, make it 2 weeks and I'll throw in some supplies for Iron Creek. Flour, sugar, maybe some coffee. Consider it compensation for the inconvenience. 2 weeks? With supplies. Elena extended her hand. Deal. Silas shook it, his grip just a little too tight. Deal. Report to my foreman at dawn tomorrow. And Miss Vargos, bring work clothes. This isn't going to be easy. He signaled his men to release the cattle. They scattered toward home immediately, and one of Silas's hands herded them in the right direction. The moment they were out of earshot, Coulter rounded on Elena. What the hell were you thinking? I was thinking 6 cattle are worth more than my pride. This isn't about pride. This is about... He stopped, running a hand through his hair in frustration. You know what he's going to do, right? Work you into the ground. Make sure every person in Red Hollow sees you serving at the Whitmore Ranch like some kind of indentured servant. Turn you into an example of what happens when people cross his family. Let him try. Elena climbed back onto her horse. I survive worse than Silas Whitmore. That's not the point. Then what is the point? Elena's own frustration finally boiled over. Point is, you need $800 by November, and you are bleeding money from every direction. Point is, Whitmore family is circling like wolves waiting for you to fail. Point is, sometimes you do hard things to survive. I know about doing hard things, so I do this one. Coulter stared at her for a long moment, then quietly, You didn't have to. Yes, Elena said, I did. She rode back to Iron Creek alone, leaving Coulter to herd the recovered cattle. When she got home, Martin, Tommy, and Jake were waiting by the barn. Heard what you did? Martin said. His expression was unreadable. That was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Probably both, Elena dismounted. Seems to be my specialty. 2 weeks at Whitmore's. Jake shook his head. That's rough. It's just work. I done worse. It's not just work, Tommy said quietly. Everyone's going to know. They're going to talk. Let them talk. Elena started unsaddling her horse. Talk is just air moving. Cannot hurt me. But that night, alone in her small room, Elena wasn't so sure. 2 weeks at the Whitmore Ranch. 2 weeks of Silas finding ways to humiliate her. 2 weeks of the whole town watching her play out whatever revenge scenario he'd constructed in his head. She'd agreed to it anyway, because 6 cattle were worth more than her pride, and Coulter Hayes had given her a chance when no one else would. Sometimes survival meant swallowing your dignity and doing what needed doing. Elena had gotten very good at that over the years. She just hoped she'd still have any dignity left when those 2 weeks were done. The Whitmore Ranch made Iron Creek look like a child's drawing next to a masterpiece. Elena stood at the edge of the property at dawn, taking it all in. The main house was 3 stories of painted white wood with actual glass windows that caught the early sun. The barns were pristine, the fences arrow straight, the grounds maintained with the kind of precision that required money and staff. Even the horses in the nearest pasture looked expensive, thoroughbreds probably, with coats that gleamed like polished wood. This was what Silas had been so afraid of losing, this perfect, pristine display of wealth. "You the foreign girl?" Elena turned. A man in his 50s stood behind her, weathered face skeptical under a wide-brimmed hat. His shirt bore the Whitmore brand, a W with a crown on top, naturally. "I am Elena Vargos. I am here to work." "I'm Dutch, foreman." He looked her up and down like she was livestock at auction. "Boss says you're paying off a debt. 2 weeks of work for some wandering cattle." "Yes." 2 weeks is 14 days. "You work dawn to dusk? No complaining. You eat after the hands eat, sleep in the spare tack room in the barn. You don't speak to Mr. Whitmore unless he speaks to you first. You don't bother the household staff. You do exactly what you're told, when you're told." Dutch crossed his arms. "Any of that a problem?" All of it was a problem, but Elena just said, "No problem." "Good, follow me." The tack room was exactly as unpleasant as it sounded. Small, windowless, smelling of leather and horse sweat. There was a cot with a thin blanket and nothing else. Elena set down her small bundle of spare clothes and tried not to think about her room at Iron Creek, which suddenly seemed palatial by comparison. "You'll start in the laundry," Dutch said. "Household washing for the staff. Mrs. Chen will show you what needs doing." Laundry, of course. The work nobody wanted. Mrs. Chen turned out to be a tiny Chinese woman with iron-gray hair and hands that had clearly spent decades in wash water. She looked at Elena with something that might have been sympathy. "You speak English?" she asked. "Yes, not perfect, but yes. Better than my English when I first come here." Mrs. Chen gestured to the massive pile of dirty linens, clothes, and table settings. "All this need washing by tonight. Water pump outside? Soap in the cupboard? You know how to wash?" "Yes, I know." "Good." Mrs. Chen started to leave, then paused. "Word of advice. Keep your head down. Do work. Don't give them reason to make your life harder." "Why you help me?" Mrs. Chen's expression was unreadable. "Because I know what it's like to be the outsider everyone talks about. Now get to work." Elena got to work. The washing took 6 hours. 6 hours of hauling water, scrubbing fabric until her knuckles bled, wringing out heavy wet sheets, hanging everything to dry. Her back screamed, her hands cramped. The autumn sun beat down without mercy. But she finished. Dutch appeared as she was hanging the last sheet. He inspected the lines critically, checking for stains, wrinkles, anything he could find fault with. "Adequate," he finally said. "Kitchen next. They need help with meal prep." The kitchen was chaos. 3 women were working at a frantic pace, chopping vegetables, stirring pots, kneading dough. They barely glanced at Elena when she entered. "You're the new girl," one of them said without looking up. "Peel those potatoes. All of them." There were at least 40 pounds of potatoes in the basket. Elena peeled potatoes until her forearms burned and her vision started to blur. Then she chopped vegetables. Then she scrubbed pots. Then she swept the floor while the actual cooking happened around her, performed by people who'd earned the right to touch food that would be served. By the time dinner was ready for the ranch hands, Elena was swaying on her feet. "Staff eats after," one of the kitchen women reminded her. "Wait outside." Elena sat on the back steps and tried not to fall asleep sitting up. Inside, she could hear the sounds of men eating, talking, laughing. Normal evening conversation. Life continuing like she wasn't out here bleeding from her knuckles and trying not to cry from exhaustion. Finally, someone brought out a plate. Beans, bread, and a piece of meat so small it was almost an insult. "Thank you," Elena said anyway. She ate mechanically, too tired to taste anything. Then she stumbled back to the tack room and collapsed on the cot fully clothed. This was day 1 of 14. The second day was worse because her body had figured out it was being abused and decided to fight back. Elena woke up unable to fully straighten her fingers. Her shoulders had locked up overnight. Even breathing hurt. She dragged herself upright anyway and reported to Dutch at dawn. "Stables today," he said. 12 stalls need mucking out. You know how to do that?" "Yes." Mucking stalls was miserable work, even when you weren't already exhausted. The smell alone was enough to make strong men gag. But Elena had grown up around stables. She knew the rhythm of it. Fork in, lift, toss, repeat, until your arms felt like they might fall off. She was on the 8th stall when she heard voices approaching. "Ridiculous, bringing her here like this. What's father thinking?" Elena froze. That was Caroline Whitmore's voice. "He's making a point, Caro, about Hayes and his judgment." Silas. They were both coming toward the stables. Elena kept her head down and continued working. Maybe they wouldn't notice her. Maybe they'd just pass through. "Well, I think it's cruel," Caroline said. They'd stopped just outside the stall. "Whatever she did, this seems excessive." "Excessive?" She agreed to the terms. Silas's voice was cold. "Besides, it's good for Red Hollow to see what happens when you throw your lot in with the wrong people. Hayes needed that lesson. She's just the delivery method." Elena's hands tightened on the pitchfork. She wanted to turn around and tell Silas exactly what she thought of him using her to send messages. But Mrs. Chen's advice echoed in her head. "Keep your head down. Don't give them reasons." "I still think," Caroline started. "Caroline," Silas cut her off. "Go back to the house. This doesn't concern you." Footsteps retreated, one set. Elena could feel Silas still standing there, watching her work. "You know," he said conversationally, "I almost feel bad. You walked right into this trap." Elena didn't turn around, didn't speak. "Hayes must be desperate, letting you sacrifice yourself like this. Then again, that's what Iron Creek does to people. Makes them desperate, makes them sloppy." He paused. "How long do you think he'll last?" "My guess is Christmas, maybe New Year's. Then the bank forecloses, we buy the land at auction, and all of this." He gestured vaguely at everything. "Will have been for nothing." Elena stabbed the pitchfork into the soiled hay harder than necessary. "No response? Good. You're learning." Silas's footsteps finally moved away. "Finish up here. Dutch needs you in the vegetable garden after lunch." The moment he was gone, Elena let herself stop. Just for a second. Just long enough to breathe and remind herself that 2 weeks was finite, that she'd survived worse, that Silas Whitmore's words were just air moving and couldn't actually hurt her. Except they could. They did. Because he was right about the desperation. About the trap. About how Iron Creek was bleeding out, and everyone could see it happening. Elena went back to mucking stalls with a fury that made the work go faster. The vegetable garden was 3 acres of autumn crops that needed harvesting before the first frost. Elena spent the afternoon bent over rows of turnips, beets, and late squash, her back screaming in protest. The sun was merciless. Her water flask ran out halfway through. She kept working anyway because stopping meant thinking, and thinking led nowhere good. By the 4th day, Elena had stopped counting hours and just moved from task to task like a machine. Laundry, kitchen work, stable mucking, garden harvesting, equipment repair, fence mending. Whatever Dutch assigned, she did without comment or complaint. The other workers had stopped trying to talk to her. She was there, she worked, she left. Ghost labor. On the evening of the 5th day, Elena was scrubbing pots in the kitchen when Mrs. Chen appeared beside her. "You look terrible," the older woman said bluntly. "I feel terrible." Elena didn't have energy left for polite lies. "When did you last eat real food, not scraps?" Elena had to think about it. "Yesterday morning, maybe?" Mrs. Chen disappeared and returned with a bowl of actual stew, thick with meat and vegetables, and a chunk of bread with butter. "Eat. In the corner where no one sees." "I cannot." "You can. You will. Or you'll collapse, and then Dutch will send you back to Iron Creek having failed, and Silas Whitmore wins." Mrs. Chen pressed the bowl into Elena's raw hands. "So eat." Elena ate. It was the best thing she'd tasted in days, and she had to fight back tears because kindness from strangers kept catching her off guard. "Thank you," she whispered. "You remind me of my daughter," Mrs. Chen said quietly. She had your stubborn streak, thought she could survive anything through willpower alone. Her expression went distant. She was wrong. Sometimes surviving means accepting help. What happened to her? Fever. 3 years ago, Mrs. Chen turned back to her own work. So when I see stubborn girls trying to kill themselves with pride, I feed them. It's all I can do. Elena finished the stew in silence, the weight of that small kindness sitting heavy in her chest. The 7th day brought rain, cold, driving autumn rain that turned the ranch into a mud pit. Elena spent it in one of the barns, repairing tack and saddles under Dutch's critical eye. Her fingers were so stiff she could barely hold the needles. The leather was slippery with moisture. Everything took 3 times as long as it should have. You're slow, Dutch observed. I am cold and wet and have been working for 7 days straight, Elena said before she could stop herself. So yes, I am slow. Dutch raised an eyebrow. That sounded like complaining. It was observation. Elena forced her frozen fingers to push the needle through tough leather. Complaining would include swearing. I am not swearing. Something that might have been amusement crossed Dutch's weathered face. Fair enough. Keep working. By nightfall, Elena had finished the required repairs and stumbled back to the tack room so exhausted she barely registered the cold or wet. She peeled off her soaked clothes, wrapped herself in the thin blanket, and tried to sleep. She was shivering too hard. The cold had seeped into her bones during the day, and now she couldn't get warm. Elena curled into the smallest ball possible and willed her body to stop shaking. This was fine. This was survivable. Just 7 more days, just 1 more week. She must have slept eventually because suddenly someone was shaking her shoulder and pale morning light was filtering through the door. Get up, Dutch's voice. Boss wants to see you. Elena dragged herself upright, her whole body stiff and aching. What time is it? 5:30. Move. She followed him to the main house, her wet clothes from yesterday still damp because she'd been too exhausted to hang them properly. They went through a side entrance and down a hallway lined with expensive furnishings that Elena was too tired to properly appreciate. Silas was in his study, sitting behind a massive desk like a judge about to deliver a sentence. Caroline was there too, standing by the window with an expression Elena couldn't read. Miss Vargos, Silas didn't look up from the papers he was reviewing. You've completed 1 week. How are you finding the work? Fine. Elena's voice came out hoarse. She cleared her throat. Work is fine. Really? Dutch tells me you're slowing down. Yesterday's tack repairs took twice as long as they should have. Was raining, everything wet, made work harder. Excuses don't interest me. Silas finally looked at her, his expression cold. I'm offering you a choice. You can finish out your 2nd week as agreed, or you can leave now, debt unpaid, and we'll keep 4 of Hayes's cattle as compensation. Elena's exhausted brain struggled to process this. You want me to quit. I want to see if you're serious about honoring agreements. If the work is too hard, is not too hard. The words came out sharper than Elena intended. I finish what I start. Silas, she's clearly unwell, Caroline interjected. Look at her. She can barely stand. That's her choice to make. Silas leaned back in his chair. So what will it be, Miss Vargos? Another week of this? Or cut your losses now? Elena looked at him and saw exactly what this was. Not mercy. A test. He wanted her to break, to quit, so he could tell everyone in Red Hollow that the foreign girl couldn't handle honest work, that Coulter Hayes had terrible judgment in people. She would not give him that satisfaction. I finished the week, Elena said clearly. As agreed. Silas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Very well. Dutch, put her on fence repair today. The north section needs posts replaced. Boss, that's heavy work. She's not. I'm aware of what it is. Silas's tone went sharp. She says she can handle it. Let's see if she's right. Elena spent day 8 digging post holes in ground so hard it was like trying to dig through stone. Each strike of the post hole digger sent shocks through her already abused shoulders. Her hands blistered, then the blisters broke, then they bled. She wrapped them in torn fabric from her spare shirt and kept working because stopping meant Silas won. By midday, she'd completed 3 posts. She needed to finish 8. One of the ranch hands, a young guy named Peter, stopped by with his own work on a nearby section of fence. He watched her struggle for a few minutes, then called over, "You're doing it wrong. You need to wet the ground first. Makes it softer." "I don't have water." Peter disappeared and came back with a bucket. "Here. Pour it in the hole, wait 5 minutes, then dig. It'll go faster." "Why you help me?" He shrugged. "Because Dutch shouldn't have put you on this. It's a 2-person job minimum, and you clearly aren't at full strength." He glanced toward the main house. "Not all of us agree with whatever the boss is trying to prove here." Elena used the water technique. Peter was right. It helped. By the end of the day, she'd finished 7 posts instead of 8. Dutch looked at the incomplete work and shook his head but said nothing. Day 9 was chicken processing. Elena had done this before, but that didn't make it any less grim. 40 chickens needed to be slaughtered, plucked, cleaned, and prepared for storage. It was bloody, feather-filled work that left her smelling like death. Day 10 was roof repair on one of the barns. Elena was terrified of heights, but she climbed the ladder anyway and spent 6 hours replacing shingles while trying not to look down. Day 11 was helping with the farrier work, holding horses while they were shod, cleaning hooves, assisting with difficult animals. This was the first work Elena had actually enjoyed, and she threw herself into it with something approaching enthusiasm despite her exhaustion. "You're good with them," the farrier, an older man named Sam, observed. "Better than most of my assistants. I grew up with horses. They make sense to me." "Shame you're only here temporarily." Sam positioned the next hoof. "I could use help like yours permanently." "Is not permanent work. Is punishment disguised as work." Sam glanced toward the main house. "Yeah, everyone knows what this is really about. For what it's worth, most of us think Silas is being a horse's rear end about the whole thing. But nobody say anything. Nobody can afford to say anything. Whitmore employs half the town one way or another." Sam shrugged apologetically. "That's how power works in small places. You step out of line, you lose everything." Elena understood that better than she wanted to. Day 12 brought the first real disaster. Elena was working in the stables, cleaning tack, when one of the thoroughbreds, a high-strung bay gelding, spooked at something and kicked out. His hoof caught her squarely in the ribs. The impact drove all the air from Elena's lungs and sent her sprawling into the barn wall. For a moment, the world went white with pain. "Jesus, someone get Dutch!" Peter's voice somewhere far away. Elena couldn't breathe, couldn't move, just curled on the stable floor trying to remember how lungs worked. Then Dutch was there, rolling her onto her back carefully. "Where'd he get you?" "Ribs," Elena gasped. "Left side." Dutch probed the area with practiced hands. Elena hissed in pain. "Probably cracked. Maybe broken." He looked at Peter. "Get her to the tack room. Ice from the cold storage. And tell Mrs. Chen we need binding cloth." "Shouldn't we get the doctor?" Peter asked. "Doctor costs money, and she's not bleeding internally." Dutch's tone was pragmatic. "Broken ribs heal on their own anyway. Just needs rest and binding." Elena wanted to argue that she didn't need rest. She needed to finish her 2 weeks, but the pain stole her words. They got her to the tack room somehow. Mrs. Chen appeared with cloth and ice and gentle, efficient hands that wrapped Elena's torso tight enough to support the damaged ribs, but not so tight she couldn't breathe. "You need to stop," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "This is enough. 2 more days. You have broken ribs. Maybe cracked. Dutch say maybe cracked." Elena forced herself to sit up, wincing. "I can work with cracked ribs." "You're insane." "Yes." Is requirement for surviving. Elena took shallow breaths, testing the binding. It helped. Not much, but some. "Thank you. For helping." Mrs. Chen looked like she wanted to argue more, but finally just shook her head. "Stubborn girl, just like my daughter." That night, Elena lay on the cot and tried to find a position that didn't make her ribs scream. There wasn't one. Every breath hurt, every movement hurt, existing hurt. But she'd made it 12 days, 2 more, just 2 more. Day 13, Dutch took one look at her and assigned her to light kitchen work, peeling vegetables, washing dishes. Nothing that required lifting or stretching. Elena suspected Mrs. Chen had intervened somehow, and she was grateful even though she didn't say it. The kitchen women had thawed toward her slightly over the past 2 weeks. They still didn't talk much, but they stopped treating her like an intruder and started treating her like temporary help. Small improvement, but she'd take it. You really going to finish the full 2 weeks? One of them, Mary, asked while they were chopping carrots together. Yes. Even with broken ribs? Cracked ribs. And yes, Mary shook her head. You're tougher than you look. Have to be. World not kind to people who break easy. Ain't that the truth? Mary swept her chopped carrots into the pot. For what it's worth, half the staff thinks Silas is being ridiculous about this whole thing. The other half thinks you're crazy for not quitting. What you think? I think you got more guts than sense, but I respect it. Mary paused. Also, that man you work for, Hayes, he must be something special if you're willing to put yourself through this for him. Elena's hand stilled on the carrots. It's not about him being special. It's about debts and cattle and doing what needs doing. If you say so. Mary's tone suggested she didn't believe that for a second. That evening, Caroline Whitmore found Elena on the back steps eating her dinner scraps. She approached slowly, like Elena might bolt. Can I sit? Elena shrugged, which Caroline apparently took as permission. They sat in awkward silence for a moment. I wanted to apologize, Caroline said finally, for what my brother is putting you through. It's excessive and cruel, and I've told him so. Your apology changed nothing. I know, but I wanted you to know that not everyone in my family agrees with Silas's methods. Caroline smoothed her expensive skirt. I've been watching you work these past 2 weeks. You're tougher than anyone I've ever met. Tough is just surviving when you have no choice. Maybe, but most people would have quit by now, would have taken the easy way out. Caroline looked at her seriously. Why haven't you? Elena thought about that. About Coulter giving her a job when no one else would. About Iron Creek's sagging fences and desperate finances. About the way Martin had started to trust her, and how Tommy and Jake treated her like part of the crew, and how even the gray mare was learning that humans could be kind. Because something's worth fighting for, she said finally, even when fight is hard. Caroline was quiet for a long moment. Then, Coulter Hayes is lucky to have you. His other way around. He give me chance when your brother throw me away, so I make sure he not regret that chance. Elena stood up, her ribs protesting. Now I sleep. Tomorrow is last day. The final day arrived with October frost on the ground and Elena's body held together mostly by spite and Mrs. Chen's excellent bandaging. Dutch assigned her to inventory work, counting supplies in the storage barn, checking lists, organizing shelves. Tedious but manageable. Silas appeared around midday, making his rounds of the property. He found her in the storage barn, surrounded by sacks of grain and coils of rope. Last day, he observed. How does it feel? Elena didn't look up from her clipboard. Like every other day, work is work. You know, I genuinely thought you'd quit. Most people would have, after the horse kicked you. He moved closer. But you're not most people, are you? No, I am person who finish what she starts. Admirable. Stupid, but admirable. Silas leaned against a support post. Here's what I don't understand. Why are you so loyal to Hayes? He's going to lose that ranch. It's inevitable. All this suffering you've put yourself through, it's going to be for nothing. Elena set down the clipboard and finally looked at him directly. You think everything has to have winning or losing. Have to have purpose that makes sense in money or land or power. But some things just are because they are. I am loyal to Coulter Hayes because he treated me like person when everyone else, including you, treated me like problem. That is enough reason. That's sentiment. Sentiment doesn't pay debts. No. But sentiment make life worth living when debts cannot be paid. Elena picked up her clipboard again. You have everything. Big house, land, money, respect. But you use all of it to hurt people weaker than you. I have nothing. But I have more than you ever will, because I know difference between power and strength. Silas's expression went cold. Careful. You're still on my property. For 4 more hours. Then I am done, debt is paid, and I never have to look at your face again. Elena met his gaze steadily. Was good lesson, though. You teach me that cruelty is easy when you have everything. You teach me that some people use their wealth like weapon. You teach me exactly what kind of man I should avoid becoming close to. She paused. So thank you, Mr. Whitmore. You very educational. For a moment, she thought Silas might actually hit her. His jaw worked, his hands clenched. But he was too proud to admit a foreign woman with cracked ribs and bleeding hands had gotten under his skin. Instead, he said icily, "Finish your work. Dutch will have your payment at sunset." He left. Elena went back to counting grain sacks, her hands shaking slightly but her head held high. When the sun finally touched the horizon, marking the end of her 14th day, Dutch found her in the barn. He handed her an envelope. "Your pay, 2 weeks' wages plus the supplies the boss promised." He paused. "For what it's worth, you worked harder than most men I've hired. You earned this." Elena took the envelope. "Thank you. Hayes is waiting for you at the property line. Said he'd meet you there." Dutch's weathered face was carefully neutral. "Good luck, Miss Vargos. Something tells me you'll need it." Elena walked through the Whitmore ranch one last time, past the perfect fences and pristine barns and expensive horses. Past the main house where Silas Whitmore was probably already forgetting she existed. Past the kitchen where Mrs. Chen waved through the window, a small gesture of farewell. At the property line, Coulter sat on his horse waiting. He took one look at her and his expression went dark. "You're hurt. Cracked ribs. Will heal." "Elena is done now. 2 weeks finished. Debt paid." She held up the envelope. "And I have supplies for ranch." Coulter dismounted and moved toward her, his hands gentle as he helped her onto his horse. "I should never have let you do this. You not let me do anything. I choose." Elena settled into the saddle with a wince. "It was bad 2 weeks, but I survived bad things before." They rode back to Iron Creek in silence as the sun set and the prairie turned gold. Elena's whole body hurt, her ribs were on fire, and she was so tired she could barely stay upright in the saddle. But she'd done it. She'd survived Silas Whitmore's worst, and she'd come out the other side still standing. That had to count for something. When they reached Iron Creek, Tommy and Jake were waiting by the barn. They took one look at Elena and both started talking at once. "What the hell did they do to you?" "Boss, she can barely sit up." "Get the door. I'm taking her inside," Coulter said, already lifting Elena down from the horse with careful hands. She tried to protest, but her ribs screamed and the world tilted sideways. The next few hours passed in a blur. Someone, Martin, she thought, rode into Blackwood for the doctor despite Elena insisting it was a waste of money. The doctor came, a tired-looking man who prodded her ribs with clinical efficiency and confirmed what Mrs. Chen had already told her: 2 cracked ribs, severe bruising, malnutrition, and exhaustion. "She needs rest," the doctor told Coulter. "Real rest, at least a week, preferably 2. Light food, plenty of water, and absolutely no heavy labor." "She'll get it," Coulter said. The doctor left. Elena lay in her small room off the kitchen, wrapped in proper medical binding now, and stared at the ceiling. She could hear the men talking in low voices outside her door. "Can't believe Whitmore let it get this bad. He didn't let anything. He made it happen." That was Martin's voice, angrier than she'd ever heard it. "Worked her like a dog for 2 weeks just to prove a point." "We should do something," Tommy said. That's not right." "What are we going to do? March over there and demand justice?" Jake's voice was bitter. "Whitmore owns half the territory. We're barely keeping our own operation alive." "Then we do what Elena did," Coulter said quietly. "We survive, and we make sure her sacrifice wasn't for nothing." Elena closed her eyes and let sleep take her. When she woke, it was dark, and someone had left a lamp burning low on the trunk beside her bed. There was also a tray with soup, bread, and water. Her stomach growled viciously. She managed to sit up, slowly, carefully, and eat. The soup was good, thick with vegetables and actual meat. Someone had been cooking while she was gone, and it clearly wasn't any of the men. Maybe they'd hired help. Maybe they'd learned. The door creaked open. Coulter stood there, backlit by the hallway lamp. "You're awake." "Good." He came in and sat in the chair someone had dragged next to her bed. "How do you feel?" "Like I was kicked by horse and worked for 2 weeks straight." Elena managed a weak smile. "So normal." Coulter didn't smile back. "I shouldn't have let you go there." "We have this conversation already. I choose to go. Not your fault." "It is my fault. My cattle broke through my fence onto their property. My debt that needed paying. You shouldn't have been the one to—" He stopped, jaw working. "You shouldn't have had to do that. Elena set down her soup bowl. Coulter, listen to me. In my life, I do many hard things. I watch my mother die because we too poor for doctor. I work until my hands bleed to keep my brothers fed. I cross ocean alone to marry man who throw me away like garbage. 2 weeks at Whitmore Ranch is bad, yes, but is not worst thing I survive. That doesn't make it okay. No, but it make it survivable. There is difference. Elena took a sip of water. And anyway, I learn important things. Like what? Like Silas Whitmore is exactly as terrible as I think. Like some people have everything but understand nothing. Like I am stronger than I think I am. She paused. And like you are kind of man worth fighting for. The words hung in the air between them. Coulter stared at her, something complicated working across his face. Elena, I am not saying anything romantic, she interrupted quickly, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. I am saying you are a good employer, fair, honest, worth the trouble of working for. That is all. Right, of course. Coulter stood up abruptly. You should rest. Anything you need, just call. One of us will hear you. He left before Elena could figure out why her clarification had felt like a lie. Recovery was worse than the work in some ways. Elena hated lying still while there were things that needed doing. She could hear the ranch operating around her, men working, horses being tended, meals being prepared, and all she could do was sit in her room like an invalid. On the third day, she convinced Martin to let her sit in the kitchen and at least peel vegetables. He agreed reluctantly, hovering like she might break. I'm not made of glass, Elena said, annoyed. No, you're made of stubbornness and bad decisions. But Martin pushed a basket of potatoes toward her. Just the peeling, nothing that requires reaching or twisting. It felt good to be useful again, even in small ways. Tommy kept her company while she worked, talking about the fence repairs they'd finished and the pregnant cow that was having complications. Martin thinks she might need help delivering, Tommy said. He asked if you'd be up for it when the time comes. Said you're better with animals than any of us. I can help. When? Could be any day now. Could be a week. Tommy shrugged. Cows have their own schedule. The cow, as it turned out, had terrible timing. Elena had been back on her feet for exactly 5 days, still hurting but mobile, when Martin burst into the kitchen at 2 a.m. She's in labor and it's going wrong. I need help. Elena was out of bed and pulling on boots before her brain fully processed what was happening. They ran to the barn, where the pregnant cow was down on her side, breathing hard and making sounds that didn't bode well. The calf is breech, Martin said grimly. I can feel it, but I can't turn it. My hands are too big. Elena knelt beside the cow, murmuring soft words in her own language while she examined the situation. Martin was right. The calf was positioned wrong, and if they didn't fix it soon, both mother and baby would die. I try, she said, but you must help me. What followed was an hour of the most intense, exhausting work Elena had ever done. Her ribs screamed in protest as she reached inside the cow, feeling for the calf's legs, trying to manipulate them into proper position. The mother bellowed in pain and fear. Martin held her steady and followed Elena's instructions exactly. There, Elena finally gasped. I feel... Yes, the front leg's now coming first. She can push. The calf was born 10 minutes later, slick and steaming in the cold barn air. For a terrible moment it didn't move. Then Martin rubbed it vigorously with burlap, and suddenly it coughed, shuddered, and took its first breath. The mother cow turned her head and made a low, anxious sound. She's okay, Elena told her, switching back to English. Your baby is okay. You both okay. Martin sat back on his heels, covered in blood and birth fluids and grinning like an idiot. You did it! Holy hell, Elena, you actually did it. We did it. I cannot hold cow and turn calf at same time. Elena was shaking with exhaustion and relief. Is this normal? The cow having trouble? First-time mothers sometimes do, but most ranchers would have just let her die, said it wasn't worth the effort. Martin stood and offered her a hand up. You saved about $100 worth of livestock tonight, maybe more if that calf grows strong. Elena looked at the newborn, already trying to stand on wobbly legs while its mother licked it clean. $100. 1/8 of what Coulter needed by November. How many more pregnant cows we have? 3. Why? An idea was forming in Elena's exhausted brain. And if they all survive, all have healthy calves? That's another $300, give or take. But Elena, most years we lose at least one. It's just how ranching works. Maybe most years, but this year we don't lose any. Elena headed for the barn door. I watch them, all of them. I make sure they all survive. You can't watch 3 cows 24 hours a day. Then I watch them 12 hours, and you watch them 12 hours. We take shifts. She turned back to face Martin. You say yourself, each calf worth maybe $100. That is $400 total if we count this one. Maybe $500 if they are good quality. That is more than half what Coulter needs for the loans. Martin stared at her. You're serious. I'm always serious about not letting things die when I can prevent it. Elena's ribs were throbbing and she desperately needed sleep, but the numbers were adding up in her head. We have 5 weeks until November. If we can save these calves, if we can find other ways to make money, if we work harder than we think possible, maybe we save ranch. Maybe is a long shot. Yes, but is better than definitely losing everything. Martin was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the dim barn light. Then he held out his hand. Okay, we try it your way. But if you collapse from exhaustion, I'm telling the boss it was your idea. Elena shook his hand. Deal. By morning, word had spread about the successful birth. Coulter came to find Elena in the kitchen, where she was making breakfast and trying not to wince every time she reached for something. Martin told me what you did last night. I helped with Cow. It's part of job. It's not part of your job to risk your still healing ribs doing emergency veterinary work at 2 a.m. But Coulter was smiling. Thank you. That calf, that's real money. Money we desperately need. About that, Elena set down the pan she'd been scrubbing. I have idea. For making more money, but you will not like it. Try me. Elena outlined her plan. Round-the-clock monitoring of the pregnant cows, careful management of every resource, selling off anything they didn't absolutely need, maybe taking on additional work from neighboring ranches if they needed help with difficult animals. Coulter listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. That's a lot of extra work. Yes. Work you're still not fully healed enough to do. I heal faster when I am useful, is how I am made. Elena met his gaze. We have 5 weeks. Maybe we fail, but maybe we don't. Is worth trying. Coulter ran a hand through his hair, that gesture she'd come to recognize as him working through a difficult decision. Okay, we try it. But you pace yourself. I'm not risking your health. My health is my business. Not when you're working yourself into the ground. On my ranch, it's not. His voice was firm. We do this smart, or we don't do it at all. Over the next week, Iron Creek transformed into something halfway between a ranch and a military operation. Martin drew up schedules for watching the pregnant cows. Tommy and Jake took on extra fence repairs to prevent any more expensive breakouts. Coulter rode out to neighboring ranches looking for temporary work, and Elena threw herself into managing every aspect of the ranch's daily operations with a precision that bordered on obsessive. She woke before dawn to start breakfast, spent mornings in the barn with the animals, afternoons in the kitchen preparing meals and managing supplies, and evenings doing whatever needed doing, laundry, mending, equipment repair. Then she'd take the night shift with the cows, sleeping in the barn between checks, before starting all over again. It was unsustainable. Everyone knew it, but it was also working. The second calf was born without complications, a healthy heifer that fetched immediate interest from a neighboring rancher who offered $150 for it once it was weaned. The third calf came early but strong, another future sale. The fourth calf was difficult, another breech birth that took Elena and Martin 3 hours to manage, but survived. 4 healthy calves, $500 in future sales, plus the value of keeping the mothers alive for future breeding. But it still wasn't enough. October crawled toward November like a wounded animal. The weather turned colder. Frost became a morning fixture, and the loan deadline loomed closer with every passing day. Elena was in the kitchen one afternoon, reviewing their finances for the 100th time when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses. She went to the window and felt her stomach drop. 3 riders. Leading them was a man in a suit, unusual enough out here, flanked by 2 others who looked like hired muscle. They reined up at the house, and the suited man dismounted with the careful movements of someone who didn't ride often. Coulter came out of the barn. Elena couldn't hear the conversation from inside, but she could see Coulter's posture go rigid, defensive. She grabbed her shawl and went outside. "Not here to threaten," the suited man was saying. "Just to remind you of your obligations. November 15th, that's 12 days from now, $800, or the property goes into foreclosure proceedings." "I'm aware of the date," Coulter said tightly. "Are you aware of the consequences? Because the bank has already had several inquiries about this property. People interested in buying it at auction." The man adjusted his spectacles. "I'm told the Whitmore family is particularly interested." "Of course they are." The banker, it had to be a banker, noticed Elena approaching. "And you are?" "Elena Vargos, I work here." She stopped beside Coulter. "Why you come in person? Cannot wait 12 days for answer?" "The bank likes to maintain personal relationships with our borrowers, helps avoid unpleasant surprises." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Though I understand you're familiar with the Whitmore family yourself, Miss Vargos, that must make things awkward." "Nothing awkward. I work here. They work there. Very simple." "Indeed." The banker swung back into his saddle. 12 days, Mr. Hayes. I suggest you spend them wisely." They rode off, leaving a silence so thick Elena could almost touch it. $800, Coulter said quietly, more to himself than to her. "We have maybe 500 if we sell everything, every calf, every piece of equipment we can spare, every last thing of value." He looked at the ranch, the house, the barns, the land stretching away in all directions. "It's not enough." "Then we find more." "There is no more, Elena. I've looked. I've tried. There's nothing left to sell and no one left to borrow from." His voice cracked slightly. "We're going to lose it. All of it." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to tell him there was always another way, another option, another plan. But standing there in the cold October afternoon, watching the banker ride away with foreclosure in his saddlebags, she couldn't find the words. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, running numbers in her head over and over. $500 in assets, $800 needed, $300 gap that might as well have been $3,000. The house was quiet, except for the usual settling creaks. Everyone else had gone to bed hours ago, exhausted from another brutal day of work. Elena got up and went to the kitchen. Maybe tea would help. Maybe moving would help. Maybe anything would help. She found Coulter already there, sitting at the table with papers spread out in front of him and a lamp burning low. He looked up when she entered, then gestured to the chair across from him. "Can't sleep either?" "Too many thoughts." Elena sat down and looked at the papers. Loan documents, sale receipts, calculations scratched out and redone. "You find solution?" "No, but I keep hoping if I stare at these numbers long enough, they'll magically change." He pushed them away. "Stupid, I know." "Not stupid, is hope. Hope is what keeps people going when everything else say quit." Coulter was quiet for a moment. Then, "Why do you care so much? About Iron Creek, about me, about any of this? You could walk away tomorrow, find work somewhere else, somewhere that's not circling the drain." It was a fair question. Elena had asked herself the same thing more than once. "When I'm small girl," she said slowly, "my father take me to neighbor's farm. Their barn is falling down, roof caving in. Everyone in village say is too broken to fix, should tear down and start over. But barn has history, is where neighbor's father was born, where they keep family things, where memories live. So my father and neighbor, they spend whole summer fixing it, board by board, nail by nail. Everyone say they waste time, but when they finish, barn stands strong, and neighbor cry because he think he lose piece of his family, but instead he save it." She looked at Coulter directly. "Iron Creek is your barn, is place where your father's work lives, where your history is. Maybe is falling down. Maybe everyone say is waste of time to fix. But you try anyway. And when I see person who try to save something important even when it's hard, even when people say is impossible, I want to help. Because that is kind of person worth knowing." Coulter's expression did something complicated. "You're remarkable. You know that?" Elena felt heat rise in her face. "I am stubborn and foolish. You say so yourself." "I said you make bad decisions. Didn't say they weren't brave ones." He reached across the table and took her hand, just held it, his palm warm and calloused against hers. "I don't know how this is going to end, but I'm glad you're here. Even if we lose everything, I'm glad I met you." Elena's heart was doing strange things in her chest. We not lose everything yet. Still 12 days. 12 days to find $300. Might as well be 12 days to fly to the moon. They sat there in the quiet kitchen, hands linked across the table, while the lamp flickered and outside the prairie wind whispered through the grass. Elena tried to think of something encouraging to say, some plan they hadn't considered, some miracle that might save them. Nothing came. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Elena was hanging laundry when a wagon rolled up. Not fancy, but sturdy and well-maintained. A woman climbed down, older, with graying brown hair and a face that had seen weather and work. "I'm looking for Elena Vargos," she called out. "I am Elena." She set down the wet sheet and walked over. "How I help you?" "I'm Margaret Chen. I think you know my mother. She works at the Whitmore Ranch." Elena's surprise must have shown on her face because Margaret smiled slightly. "She wrote to me about you, said you reminded her of my sister, said you worked yourself half to death for 2 weeks and never complained once. Your mother is very kind. She helped me when she not have to. That's what she does. Help stubborn girls who don't know when to quit." Margaret's expression grew more serious. "I heard Hayes is in trouble with the bank. That true?" Elena hesitated. Ranch business was ranch business. But something in Margaret's face suggested this wasn't idle gossip. "Yes, is true. How much does he need?" $800. We have maybe 500. Not enough." Margaret nodded slowly, like she'd expected this. "I run a dairy farm about 20 miles east of here. Been doing it 15 years since my husband passed. It's good land, good operation, but I'm getting older and the work is getting harder." She paused. "I've been thinking about selling some of my stock, moving to something smaller, more manageable. And I remember Coulter Hayes from years back. His father helped me out when I was first starting." "Good people." Elena's heart started beating faster. "You want to sell cows?" 20 head, dairy cows, good producers, worth about $30 each in the right market." Margaret pulled a piece of paper from her pocket. "I checked with the dairy collective in Blackwood. They're looking for new suppliers. If Hayes can take on my cows and the milking operation, I'll sell them to him for $15 a head instead of $30. That's $300 in value for half the price. He builds the dairy into the ranch, sells the milk, pays me back over time." Elena could barely breathe. $300. That is exactly what we need. "I know. My mother included the details in her letter." Margaret's smile was knowing. "She also said you're the kind of person who fights for the people who treat her right, so I figured this was a fight worth joining." "But why? You don't know us." "No, but I knew Coulter's father, and I know my mother's judgment of character is usually solid. Plus, honestly," Margaret shrugged, "I like the idea of Silas Whitmore not getting his hands on this land. Man's a vulture. World could use fewer vultures." Elena wanted to hug this stranger, but settled for shaking her hand vigorously. Thank you so much. I get Coulter. He will want to talk details." Already here, Coulter had appeared from the barn, probably drawn by the unfamiliar wagon. "Mrs. Chen, it's been a long time." What followed was an hour of intense negotiation. Margaret laid out her terms, $300 paid over 3 years at low interest. The cows delivered within the week. Hayes would need to build proper milking facilities, establish a routine with the dairy collective, and maintain the herd properly. It was a lot of work, a lot of additional responsibility, but it was also exactly what they needed. "Done," Coulter said, and they shook on it. "I'll have the papers drawn up in town tomorrow." After Margaret left, Elena and Coulter stood in the yard watching her wagon disappear over the rise. $800, Coulter said quietly. "We actually have $800. We have it in promises and future sales and dairy cows we don't have yet," Elena corrected. "But yes, we have enough to make the payment." Coulter turned to her, and his expression was something Elena couldn't quite read. "We did it. You did it. Not me. Was Margaret Chen who came here because of you, because her mother saw something in you worth mentioning in a letter, because you made an impression even in the middle of Silas Whitmore's petty revenge." Coulter took her shoulders gently. "Elena, you saved this ranch. You know that, right? I helped. Everyone helped. It was team effort. Stop being modest for once in your life and just take the compliment." But he was smiling. Elena smiled back, feeling something warm and impossible spreading through her chest. "Okay, I helped save ranch. It is good feeling. Yeah, it is. They stood there for a moment longer than necessary, and Elena became suddenly, acutely aware that Coulter's hands were still on her shoulders, and they were standing very close, and his eyes were doing something that made her heart race. Then Martin's voice called from the barn, "Boss, that fence in the east pasture gave out again. We need help before the cattle wander off." The moment broke. Coulter stepped back, clearing his throat. "Right, fence. I should—" "Yes, and I have laundry." Elena gestured vaguely at the wash lines. They went in opposite directions, but Elena couldn't stop smiling for the rest of the afternoon. On November 15th, they rode into Red Hollow with $800 in a leather pouch. All of it, the future calf sales, Margaret Chen's payment for the dairy cows, every spare dollar they'd scraped together over 5 weeks of brutal work. The bank was a small brick building on Main Street. Elena waited outside with the horses while Coulter went in to settle accounts. She could see people staring, the foreign woman who'd caused such a scandal, standing bold as brass in the middle of town. Let them stare. 15 minutes later, Coulter emerged with papers in hand and an expression Elena couldn't quite read. "Well?" she asked. "Paid in full. The ranch is secure for now." He looked at the papers like he couldn't quite believe them. "Iron Creek survives another season." Elena felt relief crash over her like a wave. "Is good. Is very good." They were getting ready to mount up when a familiar voice called out, "Hayes, wait a moment." Silas Whitmore crossed the street toward them, his expression carefully neutral. Behind him, Elena could see Caroline hovering by the general store. "Heard you made your payment," Silas said. "Congratulations." "Thanks." Coulter's voice was flat. "That all you wanted?" "Actually, no." Silas glanced at Elena briefly. "I wanted to apologize for how I treated Miss Vargos, both initially and during her time at my ranch. It was ungentlemanly." Elena blinked. Of all the things she'd expected, an apology from Silas Whitmore had not been on the list. "It's also come to my attention," Silas continued stiffly, "that I may have been hasty in my judgment. My sister has pointed out, repeatedly, the character has nothing to do with accent or origin, and that my behavior was, in her words, petty and cruel." "Your sister is smarter than you," Elena said before she could stop herself. Coulter coughed to cover a laugh. Silas's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, she is." He looked like the words physically pained him. "In any case, I wanted to say I was wrong. That doesn't undo what happened, but for whatever it's worth, you have my apology." Elena studied his face, looking for the trick, the hidden angle. But Silas just looked tired and maybe a little ashamed. "I accept apology," she said finally. "Not because you deserve forgiveness, but because carrying anger is heavy and I am tired." Silas nodded once, sharp, then turned and walked away without another word. "Well," Coulter said after a moment, "that was unexpected." "Yes, but changed nothing. He still is man who hurt me because I am different. Apology is just words. Actions matter more." Elena swung up into her saddle. "We go home now. I want to see ranch we save." They rode back to Iron Creek as the autumn sun set over the prairie, painting everything gold and orange. The wind was cold, but not cruel. The grass whispered around them. And for the first time since she'd arrived in this brutal, beautiful territory, Elena felt like maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place she could belong. Winter came to the prairie like a fist closing around everything soft and vulnerable. Elena woke one morning in late November to find frost coating the inside of her window, turning the glass into a garden of ice crystals. Outside, the world had gone white overnight, not with snow yet, but with that particular kind of cold that made the air itself feel sharp enough to cut. She dressed quickly, layering every piece of clothing she owned, and headed to the kitchen. The stove had gone out during the night, and her breath made clouds in the cold air as she worked to get it lit again. "Going to be a hard winter," Martin said, appearing in the doorway with an armload of firewood. "I can feel it in my bones. We need to start preparing now or we'll be in trouble come January." He was right. Elena had seen hard winters before, the kind that killed livestock and people with equal indifference. The kind where being unprepared meant not surviving to see spring. Over breakfast, they made lists. Firewood to chop and stack, hay to secure in the barn, The dairy cows, now arrived and settled into their new home, needed proper shelter built before the real cold hit, food stores to check and reinforce. Every fence line inspected and reinforced because cattle that wandered off in a blizzard were as good as dead. "It's going to take all of us working every daylight hour," Coulter said, studying the list. "Maybe longer." "Then we work longer," Elena said simply. "Is not first hard winter any of us survive." But as November bled into December and the cold deepened, Elena realized this winter was different from anything she'd experienced. The prairie offered no shelter, no windbreaks, no mercy. When storms came, they came with a fury that seemed personal. The wind didn't just blow. It screamed, driving ice and snow horizontally across the flat land with enough force to blind you. The first real storm hit 3 days before Christmas. Elena was in the barn checking on the dairy cows when the temperature dropped so fast she could feel it through her layers of clothing. The sky had gone a sickly yellow-gray, and the wind had that particular sound that meant something bad was coming. "Get inside," Martin shouted from the barn door. "This is going to be a bad one." They barely made it to the house before the storm hit. The wind came first, howling like something alive and angry. Then the snow, thick, wet, driving snow that turned the world white within minutes. "The cattle," Tommy said, pressed against the window. "Boss, we've got maybe 60 head in the north pasture. If they panic, we can't get to them in this," Coulter said. His face was tight with worry. "We'd die trying. Best we can do is hope they find shelter near the tree line." Elena stood by the stove thinking. 60 cattle represented most of their herd. Losing them would mean losing everything they'd fought for. The loan might be paid, but the ranch still needed to eat, still needed income to survive. "How long storms like this last?" she asked. "Could be hours. Could be days." Jake was stoking the fire, adding more wood. "Once it starts, you just have to wait it out." The storm lasted 36 hours. 36 hours of wind that shook the house's foundations and snow that piled against the walls until the first-floor windows were half buried. They took turns keeping the fires going, rationing food because nobody knew how long they'd be trapped inside. The cold crept in through every crack and gap, making even huddling by the stove barely tolerable. On the second night, Elena couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the cattle out there, about the dairy cows they'd worked so hard to acquire, about everything they stood to lose. She found Coulter in the kitchen, staring at nothing. "You should sleep," she said. "Can't. Keep thinking about what we're going to find when this stops." He looked at her, and in the lamplight his face was haggard. "Could lose everything, again, after everything we did to save this place." Elena sat down across from him. "Maybe, maybe not. But sitting here imagining worse does not change what is happening outside. Doesn't change that I should have moved them closer, should have seen this coming. You are not weather prophet, cannot predict storm." She reached across and took his hand, that gesture that had become familiar over the past months. "You do best you can with information you have, that is all anyone can do." "What if my best isn't good enough?" It was the question Elena had asked herself 1,000 times in her life. What if working until you bled wasn't enough? What if crossing an ocean and enduring humiliation and fighting for every scrap of dignity didn't matter in the end? What if you could do everything right and still lose? "Then you survive anyway," she said. "You pick up pieces and you start again, is what people like us do. Is only thing we know how to do." Coulter's hand tightened on hers. "I don't know what I would have done without you. This past few months, you've been the only reason I didn't give up." "Is not true. You would find way. You are stubborn." "So are you. Maybe that's why—" He stopped, something complicated working across his face. "Why what?" "Why I'm about to do something incredibly stupid." And before Elena could ask what he meant, Coulter leaned across the table and kissed her. For a moment, Elena's brain simply stopped working. Then it started up again in a rush of warmth and confusion, and something that felt dangerously like hope. She kissed him back, her cold hand coming up to touch his face, and the kitchen with its dying fire, and the storm howling outside, and the uncertain future all faded into something distant and unimportant. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Coulter said, "I've wanted to do that since the day you stopped those horses. Maybe before." "Is very stupid," Elena agreed. "I am employee. You are boss. is complicated. I know. And I have nothing. No money, no status, no way to help you if people in town decide to make problems about this. I know that too. And my English still is not perfect, and I still sound foreign, and people still whisper when I walk by. Elena, Coulter was smiling now. I don't care about any of that. I care that you're brave and stubborn, and you saved my ranch, and you look at me like I'm worth something even when I'm failing at everything. I care that when you talk to frightened animals, they calm down. And when you work, you give everything you have. And when you smile, which isn't often enough, it makes me want to figure out how to make you smile more. Elena felt something hot behind her eyes. That is many words for man who usually say very little. I've been saving them up. He was still holding her hand. So what do you think? Is this completely stupid or just mostly stupid? Is extremely stupid, Elena said. Then she kissed him again, because sometimes the stupid thing was also the right thing, and she was tired of pretending she didn't feel whatever this was between them. The storm broke the next morning, leaving behind a world transformed. Snow had buried everything: fences, equipment, entire sections of the barn. The prairie stretched away in all directions under a blanket of white so bright it hurt to look at. All right, Martin said, already pulling on extra layers. Let's go see how bad it is. They found the cattle huddled in a grove of trees near the north pasture, cold and miserable but alive. All 60 head accounted for. The dairy cows had stayed in their shelter, protected by the barn walls. A few fences were down. Some equipment was buried and would need digging out, but nothing catastrophic, nothing they couldn't recover from. We got lucky, Coulter said, relief evident in his voice. Luck is just preparation meeting opportunity, Martin replied. We prepared. Storm could have been worse. That's not luck. That's good ranching. But Elena knew better. They'd been lucky, and luck was a finite resource. The winter was just beginning, and they'd need more than preparation to survive what was coming. The cold deepened as December wore on. The work became a constant battle against freezing, keeping water from turning to ice, keeping animals fed and sheltered, keeping themselves from succumbing to the cold that wanted to creep into your bones and stay there. Elena had never been so tired in her life. Every morning was a fight to leave her warm bed. Every task took twice as long with numb fingers and frozen equipment. The kitchen, her domain, became the only truly warm place in the house, and she spent hours there not just cooking but thawing out, trying to remember what it felt like to not be cold. On Christmas Eve, she made dinner with what supplies they had. Not fancy: roasted chicken, potatoes, beans, bread. But she put care into it, the way her mother had taught her. Food prepared with attention was food that nourished more than just the body. They ate together around the kitchen table, all 5 of them, and for a little while the work and the cold and the constant worry faded into the background. Tommy told a story about the Christmas his brother had gotten drunk and fallen in the pig pen. Jake talked about Christmases in his childhood, before the war, when things were different. Martin was quiet but smiled at the stories. Coulter caught Elena's eye across the table and smiled, and something warm bloomed in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove. After dinner, when the others had gone to bed, Elena and Coulter sat together by the dying fire. I have something for you, Coulter said. He pulled out a small wrapped package. It's not much, but I wanted you to have it. Elena unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a pair of leather gloves, work gloves, but new and well made, lined with soft wool. Your hands were bleeding the other day, Coulter said quietly. From the cold and the work, I thought, you need better gloves. Elena stared at the gloves, her throat tight. She'd owned many things in her life, but very few people had ever given her gifts, especially not gifts chosen with such care, such attention to what she actually needed. Thank you, she managed. Is very kind. I also wanted to ask you something. Coulter was nervous. She could hear it in his voice. When spring comes, when things are more stable, would you consider staying? Not as hired help, as something else, as my partner, in the ranch and in everything else. Elena looked at him, this man who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who'd trusted her judgment with his animals and his land, who kissed her like she was something precious instead of something disposable. You mean as wife, she said, because there was no point dancing around it. Yes, if you'll have me. I know it's asking a lot. I know I'm not wealthy or particularly impressive. I know people will talk and it won't be easy, but I also know that every day I wake up and you're here, the ranch feels less like a burden and more like a home. And I hope, maybe you feel something similar." Elena thought about her journey, about the ship and the poverty and the humiliation and the brutal 2 weeks at Whitmore's ranch, about every hard thing she'd survived to get to this moment, sitting in a warm kitchen with a good man asking if she'd share his life. "Yes," she said simply, "I will stay. I will be your partner and your wife, but not because you ask nicely or because I have nowhere else to go, because I choose you the same way you choose me, because we fight good together, because when I think of future, I want to see this ranch and this life and you in it." Coulter kissed her again, and this time it felt like a promise. They were married in February, on a day so cold the preacher's breath made clouds while he spoke. No fancy church wedding, just a quick ceremony in the courthouse in Blackwood with Martin, Tommy, and Jake as witnesses. Elena wore the best dress she owned, which wasn't saying much, but Coulter looked at her like she was wearing silk and diamonds. News spread through Red Hollow faster than wildfire. The foreign woman and the struggling rancher. Some people were scandalized, some were amused, some genuinely wished them well. Elena discovered she didn't care what any of them thought. What mattered was the ring on her finger, simple silver that Coulter had saved for, and the way he said her name, and the fact that she finally had something she'd been searching for without knowing it, a place where she belonged not in spite of who she was, but because of it. Spring came slowly, reluctantly, like it wasn't sure winter deserved to end. But eventually the snow melted, the grass turned green, and the prairie transformed from a frozen wasteland into something almost beautiful. The dairy operation was thriving. The calves they'd saved were growing strong. The ranch that had been on the edge of collapse 6 months ago was now stable, even profitable. Not wealthy, they'd probably never be wealthy, but surviving, which was its own kind of success. One evening in late April, Elena was in the barn checking on the gray mare, now fully trained and gentle as a lamb, when she heard voices outside. She stepped out to find a young couple standing uncertainly by the fence, looking at the ranch house. "Can I help you?" Elena called out. The woman turned. She was young, maybe 20, with dark skin and scared eyes. The man beside her looked equally nervous. Both had that particular look Elena recognized immediately. Newcomers, displaced, not sure where they fit. "We heard this place sometimes hires," the man said. His accent was thick. Caribbean maybe, or somewhere in the South. "We're looking for work. Both of us can work hard, we just need a chance." Elena studied them for a moment, saw herself in their uncertain postures, their defensive hope, their expectation of rejection. "You have experience with cattle?" she asked. "Some. I worked on a ranch in Texas before we had to leave. She's good with horses and cooking." He gestured to his companion. "We don't need much, just honest work and a place to stay." Elena glanced toward the house, where Coulter was emerging onto the porch. He caught her eye, and she saw the question there. "What do you think?" She thought about the day she'd arrived at Iron Creek with nothing but desperation and a willingness to work. About how one chance, one person seeing potential instead of problems, had changed everything. "We can always use help," Elena said, "especially with spring planting coming. You can stay in the bunkhouse. Meals included. We pay fair wages. Not much, but fair. You work hard, we get along fine. You cause problems, you leave. Deal?" The couple looked at each other, something like disbelief crossing their faces. Then the woman said, "Deal. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. Work is hard, but is honest." Elena headed back toward the barn. "Come on. I show you where you sleep. Tomorrow we see what you can do." That night, lying beside Coulter in the bedroom that was now theirs, Elena thought about how strange life could be. How you could cross an ocean expecting one thing and find something completely different. How rejection and humiliation could somehow lead to belonging. How the worst moments could plant seeds that grew into the best ones. "What are you thinking about?" Coulter asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. "About circles," Elena said. "About how we become the things we need. I need someone to give me a chance, so now I give chances to others. You need someone to help save your ranch, so now we help other people save their lives. Is like..." She searched for the English word. "Like paying forward?" "Paying it forward. Yeah." Coulter was quiet for a moment. "Your English has gotten really good, you know." "I still have accent," I know, I love your accent. Why? Most people think it make me sound stupid. Most people are wrong about a lot of things. Coulter turned to face her in the darkness. Your accent sounds like survival, like someone who learned a whole new language because she had to, because she refused to let something like words stop her. That's not stupid. That's extraordinary. Elena felt that familiar warmth in her chest, the one that still surprised her sometimes. You are very sentimental for Rancher. Only with you. Everyone else gets regular Rancher behavior. She laughed and kissed him, and outside the prairie wind whispered through new grass, carrying with it the smell of earth and growing things and possibilities that hadn't existed 6 months ago. By summer, Iron Creek had transformed. The new couple, James and Ruth, had proven to be excellent workers. The dairy operation was profitable enough that they'd paid off Margaret Chen early, and she'd cried with gratitude. The cattle were thriving. The ranch that had been dying was now growing. Word got around. Elena Hayes, people had finally started calling her by her married name, was someone who helped newcomers, who understood what it meant to be displaced, who gave chances to people others overlooked. More workers came, asking for opportunities. Some stayed. Some moved on after earning enough money to continue their journeys. But they all left having learned that this corner of the prairie was different from other places. One afternoon in July, Elena was in the garden. They'd started growing vegetables to supplement their meals and sell the surplus, when a fancy carriage rolled up the drive. She straightened, wiping dirt from her hands, and watched Caroline Whitmore climb out. "Mrs. Hayes," Caroline said formally, "do you have a moment?" Elena gestured to the porch. They sat on the steps, and for a while neither spoke. Finally, Caroline said, "I wanted to apologize, properly, for everything my family put you through. Your brother already apologized, months ago." "I know, but I didn't, and I should have." Caroline smoothed her expensive skirt. "I watched what happened to you, and I did nothing. I told myself it wasn't my business, that I couldn't change Silas's mind anyway, but that was cowardice dressed up as practicality." Elena considered this. "It's hard to stand up to family. I understand. Maybe. But you stood up to people who were cruel to you, even when you had nothing and nowhere to go. That took real courage. My silence was just silence." Caroline looked out at the prairie. "I've been thinking a lot about courage lately, about what it actually means." "Why?" "Because I'm leaving. The Whitmore Ranch, Red Hollow, all of it. Going east to live with my aunt in Philadelphia. Going to study nursing at a women's college there." She turned to Elena. "My father and brother think I'm insane, but I realized watching you that staying in a place where you're miserable just because it's comfortable is its own kind of cowardice." Elena felt something shift in her understanding of Caroline Whitmore. "That is very brave, leaving everything you know." "You did it." "I had no choice. You have choice and you choose anyway. That is harder." Caroline smiled, a real smile, not the polite society version. "Maybe we're both just stubborn women who don't know when to quit." "Is not bad thing to be," Elena said. "World need more stubborn women." They sat together for a while longer, watching the summer wind move through the grass. Two women who'd started as enemies finding something like understanding in the space between them. August brought the first test of Elena's new position in the community. A wildfire started 20 miles south, driven by drought and wind. Every ranch in the territory was vulnerable. The call went out for help: men, equipment, water, anything that could stop the fire from spreading. Coulter and the ranch hands went immediately. Elena wanted to go too, but someone needed to stay and protect Iron Creek if the fire shifted direction. She spent 3 days watching the horizon, seeing smoke stain the sky, not knowing if Coulter was safe. Ruth and James helped her prepare, wetting down the buildings, moving the most valuable livestock to safer pasture, packing emergency supplies in case they had to run. When Coulter finally returned, exhausted and covered in soot, Elena didn't say anything, just held him while he shook with exhaustion and relief. "We stopped it," he said hoarsely. "Lost a lot of land, few buildings, but we stopped it before it hit the main ranches." "You are safe. That is what matters." Everyone worked together. Hayes, Whitmore, all the smaller operations. Didn't matter who had money or who was struggling. Fire doesn't care about property lines. He pulled back to look at her. "People are starting to understand what you've been saying all along, that we're stronger together than divided." Elena thought about that. about how crisis had a way of forcing people to see past their prejudices, at least temporarily. It wasn't perfect. Many people would go back to their old ways once the danger passed. But some would remember. Some would change. That was enough. Change happened slowly, one person at a time, one choice at a time. By the time autumn returned, completing the circle of seasons, Iron Creek had become something neither Elena nor Coulter had imagined that first desperate day when she'd stopped his stampeding horses. It was still a ranch, still a working operation, but it was also something else. Proof that people who were rejected, overlooked, and underestimated could build something that mattered. On the anniversary of the day they'd met, Coulter found Elena in the barn with the gray mare, now one of their best working horses. 1 year, he said. Can you believe it? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Elena stroked the mare's neck. Feel like lifetime and also like yesterday. Any regrets? Elena thought about that seriously, about the hardships and the struggles and the moments when she'd wondered if survival was worth the cost, about the humiliation and the pain and the constant work that never seemed to end. No, she said finally. No regrets. Every hard thing lead me here, and here is good. Even though you're married to a man who's still barely keeping a ranch afloat? Ranch is doing fine, and I am not married to ranch. I am married to stubborn man who see past accent and foreign face to person underneath. That is rare thing. That is valuable thing. She paused. In my language, we have saying, home is not place where you are born. Home is place where they understand you. This is my home now. You make it my home. Coulter pulled her close, and they stood together in the barn while the autumn wind whispered promises of another hard winter coming, another cycle of struggle and survival and small victories that added up to something like happiness. Years would pass. Some would be good, some would be brutal. The ranch would thrive and struggle and thrive again, the way all things in life moved in rhythms. More displaced workers would come seeking chances, and Elena would give them the same thing Coulter had given her: opportunity without judgment, work without shame, belonging without prerequisites. Children would come too, eventually. 2 sons and a daughter who would grow up speaking 2 languages and understanding that strength came not from fitting in but from knowing who you were. Elena would teach them her mother's songs and her father's horse-gentling techniques, while Coulter taught them the land and the seasons and how to read weather in the sky. Red Hollow would change, slowly but surely. Not because people suddenly became enlightened, but because economics and necessity forced them to reconsider their prejudices. Immigrants and outsiders became neighbors, became friends, became family. The town that had rejected Elena would eventually elect a mayor whose parents had come from China, and nobody would think it remarkable. But all of that was future, unknowable in that autumn afternoon. What mattered was the moment. Elena and Coulter standing in their barn on their ranch, having survived their first year together, ready to face whatever came next. You know what I think? Coulter said. I think you crossing that ocean was the best worst thing that ever happened to you. Elena considered this. You are right. Was terrible journey, lead to terrible rejection, lead to very hard work and much suffering, but also lead me here, to life I could not imagine before. So yes, best worst thing. She smiled. Life is like that, I think. The things that break us sometimes also make us stronger. The people who reject us sometimes lead us to people who accept us. The disasters sometimes become the best stories later. That sounds like something you should write down. For the kids someday. Maybe I will. Or maybe I just live it, and they see by watching. Actions teach better than words. They walked back to the house together as the sun set, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. Smoke rose from the chimney. Voices drifted from the bunkhouse where James and Ruth were settling in for the evening. The dairy cows lowed contentedly. The horses moved through the pasture like shadows. Everything was imperfect and incomplete, and held together by work and stubbornness and hope. But it was theirs. Built from nothing by people who'd been told they were nothing. And standing there on the porch of Iron Creek Ranch, looking out at the endless prairie with Coulter's hand in hers, Elena Vargos Hayes understood something fundamental about survival and belonging and the strange winding paths that lead us home. The frontier hadn't been kind to her, but she'd been strong enough to survive it anyway. And in surviving, she'd done more than just endure. She'd transformed the very place that tried to break her. That was the story she'd tell someday, when people asked how she ended up here. Not a story about destiny or fate or things happening for a reason, but a story about choices made in desperate moments, about kindness found in unexpected places, about two broken people building something whole together. A story about a woman who crossed an ocean searching for survival and found something far more valuable. A life worth fighting for, a love worth keeping, and a home that understood her accent meant not ignorance, but courage. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying that story forward into the future, where it would become legend, then memory, then simply the foundation on which everything else was built. And in the warm kitchen of Iron Creek Ranch, Elena Hayes, formerly Elena Vargos, formerly a displaced immigrant with nothing but stubborn pride, began preparing dinner for her family, her hands steady and her heart finally impossibly at peace.